Have you ever heard your name whispered from beneath the ground? Because I have, and it happened in a cemetery that wasn't supposed to exist. The first time I saw Ash Grove Cemetery, it wasn't on any map. It appeared out of nowhere on a fog-drenched road just outside Eldridge, Maine, a town that barely made it into the state's records. I'd driven that road countless times before, yet that night, an old, rusted gate stood open where there had never been one. Above it, in crooked iron letters, hung the name Ash Grove, half the letters bent, half eaten by rust. The strange part? I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be asleep in my apartment 2 hours away. But after a restless night haunted by the same dream, me standing in a graveyard under red skies, someone whispering my name from the dark, I got in my car and drove without knowing where I was going. The moment my headlights hit that gate, I slammed the brakes. The air grew cold, unnaturally cold. My breath fogged the windshield. I could smell damp earth, rotting flowers, and something metallic, like blood. I told myself to turn around, but something about that gate, it pulled me in. It wasn't curiosity. It was compulsion, like I was being called. I parked the car on the shoulder, left the engine running, and stepped out. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The iron gate groaned when I pushed it. Inside, rows of gravestones stretched endlessly, far deeper than any small-town cemetery should go. The fog rolled thick between the tombs, moving almost like it was breathing. Then, something caught my eye. A faint light flickering deeper inside, near a large stone angel missing its face. I followed, each step sinking into damp soil. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the crickets stopped. That's when I saw it. A fresh grave. The soil was still soft, the headstone clean, and on the stone, carved neatly, was my full name. Ethan Ward, 1992-2023. My heart dropped into my stomach. I froze. This had to be a prank, a nightmare. But when I stepped closer, I noticed something worse. Beside the headstone lay a small silver necklace. My necklace, the one I'd lost years ago at my mother's funeral. I fell to my knees, trembling, touching the stone. It was cold, too cold for something carved recently. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the ground under me shift as if something moved beneath the soil. Then came the whisper, soft, low, drawn out. "Ethan." I stumbled back, dropping my light. The whisper turned into a voice, my own voice. "Why did you come back? Did you?" I ran. I didn't even know which direction I was going, but I ran until I reached the gate again. Except it wasn't there. The road, the car, the lights, gone. Only fog and endless graves. That's when I realized I hadn't just entered a cemetery. I'd crossed into something else, something that didn't want me to leave. I wandered for hours, or what felt like hours. The fog swallowed time. Every turn led to the same headstone, my name. Then I heard footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate. I turned. A figure stood among the graves, dressed in black, holding a lantern. I couldn't see their face, but their presence made my chest tighten. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The figure tilted their head, then slowly lifted the lantern. The light illuminated half their face. It was me. My face. Same eyes. Same scar on my cheek from a bike accident years ago. Only, this version of me looked pale, dead. His lips cracked, skin gray like stone. He stepped closer, dragging his feet through the dirt. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan," he whispered. "They're awake now." Before I could respond, his eyes rolled white. The lantern went out. I screamed, but there was no sound. Just a wave of freezing air and the feeling of hands, dozens of them, grabbing my legs from beneath the soil. I kicked and thrashed, trying to break free as something cold wrapped around my ankle. My flashlight flickered back on for a split second, and I saw them. Rotting faces emerging from the dirt, mouths open, eyes hollow, all whispering the same thing. "Ethan Ward, welcome home." I pulled free and ran blindly into the darkness, tripping over headstones and broken fences until I crashed into something hard, a stone wall slick with moss. I pressed against it, gasping, and realized I was standing before a mausoleum. Its iron door was carved with words that sent chills through me. Those who cross cannot return. Before I could process it, the door creaked open on its own. A faint light spilled out, and I heard sobbing. A woman's voice. Familiar somehow. "Ethan, please don't leave me here." My blood turned to ice. It was my mother's voice. She'd been dead for 10 years. I hesitated, trembling, heart pounding, every instinct screaming run. But that voice, it was so real, so desperate. "Mom?" I whispered. The sobbing stopped. Silence. Then, from the darkness inside, the voice replied, lower this time. "Wrong. I'm not your mother." Something slammed into the door from inside. Once, twice. Then, a deafening bang. The door burst open, knocking me back onto the ground. From within the mausoleum came a black mist, rolling out like smoke, cold as death. In its shape, for a moment, I saw faces, hundreds of them, crying, screaming, reaching. Then, the mist rushed at me. I tried to scream, but it filled my mouth, my lungs, choking me in freezing air. My vision went white, then black. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was my own voice whispering from everywhere at once. "Now you belong here." When I woke, it was dawn. I was lying on the ground beside my car, parked exactly where I'd left it. The gate was gone. The field was empty. No graves, no fog, no cemetery. I might have believed it was a dream, if not for the dirt under my fingernails, and the silver necklace still clenched in my hand. But that wasn't the worst part. When I got home that morning, exhausted and shaking, I checked the news. On the front page of a local report, "Unknown man found dead near Ash Grove Hill." The photo showed a face that looked exactly like mine. When I saw my own face in that newspaper photo, I thought I was losing my mind. The article was brief, just a small column buried near the bottom of the page. "Unidentified man found deceased near Ash Grove Hill. No signs of foul play. Body discovered early this morning by a local farmer. The victim's identity remains unknown, though police suspect exposure." But there it was, the picture. Same brown hair, same crooked nose, same scar under the left eye. It was me. I dropped the paper onto the kitchen counter and just stared. My reflection in the window looked back, pale and trembling. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't tell which version of me was real, the one holding the paper or the one lying dead on that hill. The logical part of my brain tried to explain it. Maybe it was someone who just looked like me. Maybe the image was distorted. Maybe I was still dreaming. But another voice whispered, cold and quiet, "You saw your name on the grave, Ethan. You know what this means." I hadn't slept since that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the cold soil pulling me down again, heard the whispers of the dead crawling beneath the ground. I kept telling myself to forget it, to move on. But the more I tried, the more impossible it became, because strange things started happening. It began small, shadows moving across the hallway when no lights were on, my bedroom door opening by itself, a low humming sound that came from the floorboards at exactly 3:03 a.m. Then one morning, I woke up and found muddy footprints leading from my front door straight to my bed. That's when I knew. I hadn't left that cemetery alone. I decided to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. If that grave really existed, if something followed me out, I needed answers. So I drove to Eldridge, this time in daylight. The sun was out, the sky clear, but even under that bright light, the town felt wrong. Old, quiet, like everyone there was waiting for something. The main street had shuttered windows, faded signs, and an eerie absence of sound. No kids, no dogs. Just silence. I stopped at the only open diner I could find, Marge's Stop Eat. Inside, a gray-haired woman behind the counter stared at me as if she'd seen a ghost. "You okay, hun?" she asked, drying a glass with trembling hands. You look pale. Just tired, I muttered. Do you know anything about a place called Ash Grove Cemetery? The rag in her hands froze. Her eyes went wide. She didn't answer at first, just whispered, almost afraid to speak the name aloud. Nobody's supposed to go near that place. Why? I asked. She leaned closer, voice shaking. Because it's not real. The land up by Ash Grove Hill, there's no cemetery there. Never has been. Folks say it appears sometimes when it wants someone. When it wants someone, I repeated. She nodded slowly. People see it, wander in and vanish. Few ever come back. And the ones who do, they're not the same. They say the cemetery shows your grave before you die. I felt my stomach twist. Shows your grave before you die? Mm-hmm. She looked down, lowering her voice. But if you saw your name there, son, it's already too late. I sat frozen, gripping my coffee cup. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The woman glanced nervously toward the window. You should leave town before dark, she whispered, before it calls again. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she walked away quickly, disappearing through the kitchen door. That's when I noticed something strange. On the counter beside my cup was a small leather-bound notebook. Old, cracked with dirt caked on the edges. And on the front, faintly written in ink, were the words, Ash Grove, Gravedigger's Journal. My heart pounded. I looked around, but the woman was gone. No one else was in the diner. I hesitated only a moment before slipping the journal into my bag and leaving some money on the counter. Outside, the sky was already dimming, dark clouds rolling in fast from nowhere. I drove a few miles down the road and parked near Ash Grove Hill again. There was no gate this time, just tall grass swaying in the wind. But the air felt the same, cold, heavy, watching. I opened the journal inside the car. The first page was dated August 14th, 1887. Tonight, another soul was buried, but this one was not from our town. The boy's name was Thomas Ward. He was found dead near the road, his body cold, though the air was warm. The others said he came from nowhere. The ground here took him eagerly, as if it had been waiting. Ward. My last name. I turned the page. The cemetery grows on its own. I dig where it tells me. Sometimes the graves are already marked before I even start. Sometimes I see names that haven't died yet. I asked the caretaker once who decides the names. He said the dead do. My pulse raced. I flipped through more pages, dates spanning decades. Every entry told of the same thing, graves appearing on their own, people who saw their own names before vanishing, and something the writer called the soil beneath. The last entry, written in shaking letters, was dated October 29, 1923, exactly 100 years before last night. The ground whispered a name again tonight, Ethan Ward. I pray he never comes. I stared at that name for a long time, my skin crawling. How could it have been written a century ago? Suddenly a loud thud hit the roof of my car. Then another. I froze, heart hammering. The rain hadn't started yet. This was different. Something heavy moved above me, scraping metal. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. Then slowly, a black liquid began dripping down the windshield, thick, oily, smelling of rot. My wipers smeared it, spreading it across the glass like blood. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, trembling. There was nothing on the roof. But when I looked down at the hood, there was a single handprint. Black, wet, human. And behind me, the tall grass started moving like something crawling beneath it. I ran toward the road, clutching the journal, glancing back only once, and froze. There it was again. The gate, Ash Grove Cemetery, standing wide open in the dark, and behind it, faintly glowing in the mist, was that same stone angel, its head turned toward me this time, as if it had been waiting. The fog rolled out, cold and thick, and from the distance came a voice, soft, echoing through the night. "Ethan, the grave is ready." I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like the earth itself held me still. Something was calling me back inside. And deep down, I already knew. I was going to answer. The cold wind from Ash Grove Cemetery hit me like a wall of ice. It carried that same smell, wet earth, old flowers, and something else, something alive beneath the rot. The gate stood open as if it had been waiting all along. The iron hinges creaked slowly, moving with the wind, groaning like something in pain. My flashlight flickered again, just like last time. The beam barely cut through the fog as I stepped closer, clutching the gravedigger's journal against my chest. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to run as far away as I could. But there was another pull, something deeper than fear, like invisible hands wrapping around my ribs, drawing me in. When I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped instantly. I could see my breath clouding the air, each exhale forming a ghostly trail before vanishing into the mist. The moment my foot touched the first patch of damp soil, I heard it again. "Ethan." It wasn't a voice from one direction. It came from everywhere. From the ground, from the stones, from the fog itself. The whisper slid into my mind like cold fingers. I tried to focus, flipping through the journal by flashlight, looking for something, anything that might explain what this place was. One entry stood out near the middle, written in desperate, scrawled handwriting. "The cemetery feeds on names. It calls to the ones it remembers. When the called return, they feed the ground with their souls and the earth keeps them. The deeper I dig, the more faces I see beneath the soil. They move even when they should not." I stopped reading. My throat felt dry. The more I looked around, the more I realized this cemetery had changed. The graves weren't in the same places as before. The path curved differently now, leading toward the heart of the hill, where I saw faint movement under the fog. As I walked, the mist parted slightly and I saw the outlines of figures, shapes standing near headstones, motionless. At first I thought they were statues, but when I got closer, I realized they were bodies. Some fresh, some skeletal, their eyes open, blank and glassy as they stared at nothing. Their mouths moved slowly, repeating words I couldn't hear, their voices blending into a low hum that vibrated through the ground. I whispered, "What are you?" But none of them turned. Then one did. A woman in a tattered white dress, her skin pale and cracked like porcelain, her mouth stitched at the corners. She tilted her head sharply, eyes wide with black veins crawling outward. She raised one trembling hand and pointed behind me. I turned slowly. The ground was moving. The soil rippled, forming small mounds that began to rise, one after another. Faces, pale, mud-covered faces pressing through the earth, mouths gasping for air that didn't exist. Their eyes snapped open and all at once, they screamed. Not loud, but a dry, choked wail that pierced the silence like broken glass. I stumbled backward, tripping over a gravestone. My flashlight hit the ground, spinning its beam wildly. I could see hands reaching out from the dirt, grasping at my legs, pulling at my clothes. Then one of the faces looked straight at me and spoke. "You were supposed to stay, Ethan." I froze. The voice was my own. The soil tightened around my boots, sucking me downward. I kicked and tore free, grabbing my flashlight and sprinting down the nearest path. My lungs burned, my heartbeat thundered in my ears, but the whispering never stopped. The fog seemed alive now, swirling around me, forming faint outlines of people that vanished the second I turned toward them. At the end of the path stood the mausoleum again, the same one with the warning carved above the door. "Those who cross cannot return." But something was different this time. The door wasn't closed, it was wide open, and a dim golden light spilled out, flickering like candlelight. I could hear faint sobbing again, the same voice from before. My mother's voice. I shouldn't have gone closer, but I did. My body moved without my permission, each step sinking into the wet ground. The light inside glowed brighter, and the sobbing turned into whispering, then laughter. Low, broken, inhuman laughter. When I stepped inside, the door slammed behind me. The air was thick and suffocating. Candles burned along the stone walls, their flames bending as though breathing. The floor was covered in dirt and bones arranged in strange patterns, circles within circles, symbols etched into the stone. And in the center of the room lay a large coffin. The wood was ancient, blackened, bound with iron. The name carved into it was half buried beneath the dust, but I brushed it clean with trembling fingers. It said, Thomas Ward. The name from the journal, the boy who died in 1887. My blood ran cold. I heard something inside the coffin move, a slow scraping sound. Then, a knock. Once. Twice. Then a whisper from within. He's awake. The candles flickered violently. The floor beneath me trembled. From the cracks in the coffin, black mist began to pour out, crawling across the floor toward me like living smoke. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing all around the chamber. The ground remembers you, Ethan. The blood remembers. We are one and the same. I stumbled back toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. My palms slipped on the cold metal as I pushed with all my strength, but it felt as if the air itself was holding it shut. The mist climbed my legs, ice cold, seeping into my clothes. Then, out of the dark corners of the room, faces began to appear, hundreds of them, emerging from the walls like the stone itself was melting. They were whispering my name, over and over, a chorus of voices that filled the air until I couldn't breathe. Ethan Ward, Ethan Ward, Ethan Ward. The coffin lid began to rise on its own. A faint red glow shone from inside, and through the crack, I saw two pale hands pushing it open. The nails were black, the fingers long and thin like roots breaking through soil. I backed into the door, my heart pounding, praying to wake up, to open my eyes and find myself anywhere else. But then I saw what was inside the coffin. A boy, no older than 15, his eyes white, his mouth sewn shut, yet his chest rose and fell with slow, unnatural breaths. His skin was gray, almost translucent, and carved into his forehead were faint letters that read, Ward. He turned his head toward me even though his eyes were sewn closed. And then I heard a voice. Not from his mouth, but inside my mind. You're the last of us, Ethan. You belong beneath the soil. The candles blew out all at once. Darkness swallowed me whole. Something cold wrapped around my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. Then suddenly, light exploded around me. Daylight. I was lying in the middle of the road. My car was parked a few feet away, engine still running. The gate was gone again. Only an empty hill remained. For a long time, I sat there shaking, my mind spinning. I told myself it was a hallucination, a nightmare, something that wasn't real. But when I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my heart froze. There was dirt in my hair. My skin was grayish, and faintly, just faintly, I could see black veins crawling beneath my eyes. When I opened my mouth to scream, I saw it, a small thread of black soil between my teeth. I didn't leave the house for 3 days after that night. Every mirror in my home was covered with sheets. I couldn't bear to look at myself. The veins under my skin had grown darker, thin black lines that pulsed faintly, like the roots of a plant spreading deeper each day. My reflection had become a stranger's. Sleep offered no escape. Each night, the same dream returned. I was standing in the cemetery again, surrounded by whispering graves. 100 small voices echoed through the fog, children's voices, singing a song I couldn't understand. Each verse ended with my name, stretched and drawn out until it sounded like a curse. Ethan, come and see what sleeps beneath the willow tree. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the gravedigger's journal from my desk, my flashlight, and my car keys. The entries I hadn't read suddenly felt more urgent, like unfinished warnings meant only for me. When I flipped to the last few pages, one line stood out, underlined in heavy ink. The children are the keepers of the soil. They know who belongs to the ground. That single sentence kept echoing in my head as I drove back toward Eldridge. The road was empty, the town even quieter than before. Every window was dark. Even the diner, Marge's Stop Eat, was boarded up now. It was like the entire town had gone to sleep and forgotten to wake up. The hill came into view under a low crimson sunset. There was no gate, no fog this time, just tall grass waving gently in the cold wind. But even without seeing it, I felt the cemetery waiting. The air thickened with that familiar heaviness, that slow, crawling dread pressing against my chest. I parked near the bottom of the hill and started walking. Every step sounded louder than it should have. The grass whispered like voices when I brushed past it. And then I saw them. At first I thought they were statues, small shapes sitting in a circle near the base of a dead willow tree. 7 of them, perfectly still, each one facing inward. But as I approached, I realized they weren't statues at all. They were children, or what was left of them. Their skin was ashen gray, eyes hollow, hair matted with dirt. Each child had a faint glow behind their eyes, flickering like candlelight. They were humming that same song from my dream, their lips barely moving. I froze. My legs wanted to run, but my curiosity rooted me to the spot. The tallest child, a girl with tangled hair that looked almost silver under the dim light, turned her head toward me. Her mouth opened slightly, revealing small, sharp teeth. "You came back," she whispered. Her voice wasn't threatening. It was sad. I swallowed hard. "What are you?" The girl tilted her head. "We were here before the town, before the graves. The ground made us stay." "The ground?" I asked, stepping closer, voice trembling. She nodded slowly. "It calls those who are missing, those who were forgotten. You heard it too, didn't you? The voice beneath the soil." Before I could answer, one of the smaller children began to giggle, a high, hollow sound that didn't belong in any living throat. He was drawing shapes in the dirt with his finger, whispering to himself. When I crouched to see what he was doing, my stomach turned. He was drawing me. A perfect outline of a man lying in a grave, his name carved above the headstone. Ethan Ward. The girl spoke again. "Your grave has been waiting for a long time." I shook my head. "No, I escaped. I woke up. I left." The girl's expression didn't change. "You can leave the hill, but you cannot leave the ground. The soil remembers your name. You're already part of it." My flashlight flickered violently, and for a moment I saw the truth beneath their feet, shadows writhing in the earth, like countless bodies shifting below the surface. The children's humming grew louder, the melody twisting into something unnatural. Then the ground opened. Not like an earthquake, more like the earth was breathing. A circular pit cracked open near the willow tree, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rose from it, carrying whispers that tangled into one word. "Down." The girl pointed toward the opening. "He's waiting for you below." I took a step back. "Who's waiting?" "The one who keeps the graves," she said softly. "The first Ward." My heart stopped. Thomas Ward, the boy from the journal, the one whose coffin I'd seen. The children stood as one, turning toward the pit. Their faces glowed brighter, the light from their eyes spilling down into the darkness below like liquid fire. I should have run, but something inside me, some dark magnet buried deep in my blood, pulled me forward. I stepped to the edge and looked down. The staircase spiraled into blackness, impossibly deep. I couldn't see the bottom, but I could hear faint whispers rising from below, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of voices chanting together in a low, rhythmic murmur. As I descended, the light from above vanished. The only illumination came from faint glowing veins running through the walls, pulsing slowly like the heartbeat of something ancient. The deeper I went, the louder the voices became. Finally, I reached the bottom. A massive underground chamber opened before me, lit by dim blue fire burning in sconces made of bone. The air was thick with decay, yet it smelled faintly sweet, like damp flowers left on graves. In the center stood a figure, tall, cloaked in black, face hidden beneath a hood. Around him, the ground shimmered faintly with movement. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the floor wasn't stone. It was made of faces. Thousands of them, pressed into the dirt, their mouths open in silent screams. The figure spoke, his voice echoing as if from all directions at once. "You carry our name, Ethan Ward." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" He stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming, like gravity pulling me toward him. The air trembled. "I am the beginning of the Ward line, the first the soil ever claimed. You were born because the ground allowed it. But the cycle is ending. You were never meant to live above." I shook my head, backing away. "You're not real. You're just—" He raised his hand and the walls of the chamber pulsed. Images flickered in the glowing veins, scenes from my own life. My childhood home, my mother's funeral, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror. "Every moment you've lived was borrowed," he said. "The dead gave you time. Now it must be returned." Suddenly the faces on the floor began to move, stretching upward, their mouths opening wide. A wave of cold air hit me as the ground shifted like liquid, pulling at my feet. I tried to run, but the soil wrapped around my ankles again, dragging me down. I screamed, clutching at the journal, but even that began to crumble in my hands, its pages dissolving into dust that drifted upward like smoke. The hooded figure raised both arms. "Become what you were meant to be. The grave remembers its own." The children's song echoed through the tunnels above, their voices distant yet clear. "Ethan, come and see what sleeps beneath the willow tree." The ground swallowed me up to the waist. I could feel hands beneath the soil, countless hands pulling me down, fingers digging into my flesh. And just before I disappeared beneath the surface, I looked up one last time and saw the children standing at the top of the stairs, watching silently, their glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. They weren't singing anymore. They were smiling. The night had grown colder, but the cemetery burned with a strange internal fire. The mist was no longer white. It shimmered with a sickly green hue, like phosphorescence rising from the graves themselves. The trees around the cemetery bent slightly toward the center, as though drawn by some unseen force. The air felt thick, vibrating with whispers that no human tongue could have formed. Daniel's every breath came out in a shudder, his flashlight flickering wildly as if even the light feared to exist here. He clutched Emily's journal tighter, his fingers trembling. The pages flipped on their own, stopping at a drawing of a circle carved into the ground, surrounded by symbols identical to the ones he had seen on the headstones. Beneath it, in Emily's hurried handwriting, were the words, "Once the circle is broken, they will no longer rest." A low hum rose from the earth beneath his boots. Daniel's heartbeat matched it, pounding violently in his chest. The old graves around him began to tremble, small cracks splitting through the stone as faint hands, bony, gray, and lifeless, pressed against the inside of the earth. His mind screamed that it couldn't be real, but his eyes betrayed him. Dirt shifted, and one by one the dead began to stir beneath the soil. Daniel stumbled back, falling against a crooked gravestone. The name on it read, Rebecca Holloway, 1842-1864. He remembered that name from the journal. Emily had written about her, a young woman accused of witchcraft. Her grave was the center of the old cemetery, the same grave that Emily's notes said should never be disturbed. And yet now Rebecca's grave was moving. The ground pulsed, cracking open like a wound. Cold air burst from it, reeking of rot and something older, something primal. Daniel's flashlight died completely, leaving only the glow of the strange mist. Then, rising from the earth, came a figure. She was beautiful in the way nightmares were beautiful, pale, ethereal, with eyes blacker than the void. Her hair flowed as though underwater, her gown torn and soaked in dark soil. But what made Daniel freeze wasn't her form. It was her face. She looked exactly like Emily. Daniel's mind collapsed under the weight of the realization. The resemblance was perfect, down to the faint scar above her left eyebrow. His chest constricted, his thoughts spiraling. Could Emily have been her descendant, or worse, her reincarnation? Rebecca, or whatever she was now, spoke without moving her lips. Her voice was both echo and whisper, ancient and young. "You called me back, Daniel." He shook his head in disbelief. I didn't mean to." "You opened the circle," she said, floating closer, her bare feet not touching the ground. "The living never understand. The circle binds the forgotten. You broke it the moment you walked across my grave." Daniel backed away, his hands shaking violently. "Where's Emily? What did you do to her?" Rebecca smiled faintly, her head tilting to the side. "She wanted the truth, and she found it. The Holloway bloodline was cursed to carry my memory. She came here to free me. But instead she freed them." She pointed toward the graves, and Daniel turned just in time to see figures rising all around him. Men, women, and children in tattered burial clothes, eyes hollow and glowing faintly in the green mist. They moved slowly, their expressions empty, yet they all turned toward him in unison. "Why me?" he stammered, his voice trembling. Rebecca drifted closer until her cold breath brushed his cheek. "Because you still don't remember, do you? You were there the night Emily disappeared. You helped her dig." Daniel's mind snapped like a taut wire. Images flashed, mud, shovels, rain pouring down his face, Emily screaming as something pulled her beneath the soil. He remembered her voice, begging him to run. And he had run. He fell to his knees, choking on guilt. No, that's not possible." Rebecca knelt before him, her dark eyes gleaming. "You brought her here. You buried her secrets. Now she belongs to us." Suddenly the whispers rose into a shriek. The ground beneath him turned to black sludge, swallowing his knees, then his waist. He tried to pull free, but skeletal hands clutched at his legs. Rebecca's laughter echoed through the mist, a sound that twisted the night itself. Just before he was dragged under completely, he saw something that froze the scream in his throat. Through the fog, near the crooked gate of the cemetery, stood Emily, alive. But her eyes glowed faint green, just like Rebecca's. She watched him silently, her face expressionless. "Emily!" Daniel screamed, stretching out a hand. She didn't move. The undead closed in, their whispering voices merging into one word that made his blood run cold. "Remember." The world twisted, the sky folding inward like ink spilled over glass. Daniel's vision went black. Then, silence. When he awoke, he was lying on cold stone inside a small, candlelit crypt. The air was damp and stale, and the only sound was dripping water echoing off the walls. His hands were bound with a rough, ancient rope, and in front of him stood Emily. Only now her voice was layered, hers and Rebecca's speaking as one. "You were never meant to leave this place, Daniel. You were chosen long ago. The cemetery doesn't just bury the dead, it keeps what belongs to it." And then she smiled, with both Emily's warmth and Rebecca's wickedness. "Now, it keeps you." The candles flickered violently, and a shadow slithered across the walls, forming a shape that wasn't human. Daniel felt the floor beneath him open once more, and cold hands reached out from the darkness below. He screamed as he was pulled into the black pit, his voice echoing through the crypt like a soul falling into eternity. The last thing he heard was Emily's whisper, soft and final. "The circle is complete." Darkness. That was all Daniel knew for what felt like hours, maybe days. A suffocating black void, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. He could feel the cold soil pressing against his chest, taste the bitterness of mud on his tongue. His breath came in short gasps as panic clawed its way up his throat. He wasn't dead. Not yet. He could still move, still think. But he couldn't tell if he was buried alive or trapped somewhere far worse. Slowly, his senses began to return. A faint glimmer of light seeped through the cracks above him, a flickering orange glow like candlelight filtering through the dirt. The air shifted. He heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunching over gravel and old leaves. Then a low creak of wood. Someone was opening a door. A narrow shaft of light broke through the darkness, revealing that he wasn't in a coffin at all. He was in some kind of underground chamber, lined with stone and roots that crawled through the walls like veins. Candles burned in niches carved into the rock, their flames barely fighting back the shadows. And at the far end of the chamber stood a figure in a long black coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The figure's voice was deep, raspy, like someone who had spent years speaking only to the dead. "You shouldn't have come back, boy." Daniel struggled to sit up, his wrists still bound by the rough, ancient rope. Who are you?" he croaked. The man stepped closer, revealing a face carved by time, pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. His voice carried the weight of centuries. "I am the gravekeeper, the last one left." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. "The gravekeeper? You mean you work here? You take care of this cemetery?" The old man let out a low, bitter laugh. "Work here? No, son. I'm bound here, just like the rest of them." He leaned down, the brim of his hat casting a long shadow across Daniel's face. This place was never a cemetery for the living. It's a prison, for those who defied death. Daniel's mind reeled. "What are you talking about? What does that mean?" The gravekeeper turned away, pacing slowly across the chamber. Over a century ago, this land belonged to a family of witch hunters, the Holloways. They built their mansion right where the chapel stands now. They were obsessed with power, with immortality. And when they found Rebecca, one of the last witches of her kind, they tortured her to learn her secrets. He stopped, looking at Daniel with cold, hollow eyes. But Rebecca didn't die. Not truly. She cursed the Holloways, cursed their bloodline and this land. Every generation since has carried her memory. Every soul buried here answers to her. Daniel's heart pounded as the gravekeeper continued, his voice growing darker with every word. "Emily came to me months ago. She said she wanted to end it, to break the curse, but she didn't know the truth." "What truth?" Daniel demanded. The gravekeeper's gaze pierced him. "That the curse can't be broken, only passed on." A silence filled the chamber, thick and suffocating. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Passed on? To who? The gravekeeper stepped closer until Daniel could see the faint shimmer of symbols etched into his skin, strange runes glowing faintly under the candlelight. The one who enters the circle willingly, the one who sheds blood within its bounds. Daniel's stomach turned cold. "I didn't shed any blood." But then he remembered, the cut on his hand. The night he and Emily had first come here digging through the graveyard in the rain. He'd sliced his palm on a shard of stone. His blood had fallen onto the soil, onto Rebecca's grave. The gravekeeper's expression was grim. "The moment your blood touched that ground, the curse chose you." "No," Daniel whispered, shaking his head. "No, Emily. She wanted to. She was the one." "She knew?" The gravekeeper interrupted softly. "She knew what she had to do. She was meant to pass the curse to someone else to free herself." Daniel's breath caught. "She used me." The old man nodded slowly. "The dead always find their way through the living. She loved you, boy. But love isn't stronger than the grave." For a long moment there was only the sound of dripping water. Then, the gravekeeper sighed. "There's still one way out. One chance to break the circle. If you have the courage." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "What do I have to do?" The gravekeeper leaned closer, his eyes glinting like cold steel. "You must face her. You must face Rebecca herself, in the place where she first died. And you must do what the Holloways never could." "What's that?" Daniel asked, though part of him already knew. The gravekeeper's voice dropped to a whisper. "You must destroy her heart." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Suddenly the candles flickered violently. The air grew icy and the ground trembled. The gravekeeper stiffened, turning toward the entrance of the chamber. His voice became urgent. "She knows we're talking. She's coming." Daniel struggled against his bindings, his panic returning. "Untie me, please." The gravekeeper's hands shook as he reached for the ropes. "If you fail, boy, you'll take my place, forever." Just as the last knot loosened, the door at the top of the stairs blew open with a deafening crash. The candles went out, plunging the chamber into darkness. A cold wind rushed in, carrying the faint scent of roses and rot. From the shadows at the doorway, a soft, melodic voice spoke, familiar and haunting. "Daniel." It was Emily, but her voice carried a second tone beneath it, deeper, older, venomous. The gravekeeper grabbed Daniel's arm, his voice trembling for the first time. "Run, boy. Run to the chapel." But before Daniel could move, the darkness itself began to shift, forming into a shape, a woman in a white gown, her eyes glowing green. Emily's face smiled at him, but the expression wasn't hers anymore. Rebecca had arrived. The gravekeeper drew a rusted blade from beneath his coat, chanting in an ancient tongue, but Rebecca's laughter filled the chamber, cold and echoing. "You think you can stop me again, old man?" The walls cracked. The roots writhed. The ground split open, revealing a pit of blackness that pulsed like a living heart. The gravekeeper pushed Daniel toward the stairs. "Go, now," he roared. Daniel stumbled upward, his breath ragged, his mind racing. Behind him, he heard the gravekeeper scream, a sound cut short by the crunch of bone and the hiss of something unholy. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He burst out of the crypt into the night air, gasping, the cemetery stretching before him like an endless maze of shadows. The mist had returned, thicker than ever, swirling in unnatural patterns. The moon hung low and red, casting the graves in a bloody glow. He ran toward the chapel, its silhouette rising like a black tooth against the horizon. Behind him, the air rippled with a voice that was both Emily's and Rebecca's, echoing through the mist. "You can't escape, Daniel. You're part of this now. You always were." Daniel's legs ached, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Not until he reached the old chapel door, its wood warped and covered in strange carvings. He pushed it open, stumbling inside, slamming it shut behind him. The chapel was empty except for one thing, an old coffin resting at the center of the room, and carved into its lid was a name, Rebecca Holloway, the curse's heart. As Daniel approached it, the candles on the walls flickered to life on their own and the air grew heavy. His reflection in the coffin's glass surface wasn't his own anymore. It was Emily's, smiling faintly. And in that moment, Daniel realized the horrifying truth. He hadn't escaped her. She had brought him exactly where she wanted him. The chapel stood like a relic of despair, its air heavy with centuries of decay. The faint light of the candles cast long, quivering shadows across the cracked marble floor. Dust hung motionless in the air, and the silence was so absolute that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his skull. His eyes locked on the coffin at the center. Rebecca Holloway's coffin, untouched by time, its wood still as dark and polished as if it had been buried yesterday. He took a step closer, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The carvings on the lid seemed to shimmer faintly under the candlelight, symbols twisting and reforming like living things. His breath fogged in the cold air as he knelt beside the coffin, his trembling fingers brushing against the glass panel set into its surface. Beneath it, he saw the faint outline of a woman's form, pale and still. Her hands were folded neatly over her chest, clutching what looked like a blackened, shriveled rose. And then, her eyes opened. Daniel stumbled back, gasping as Rebecca's cold, dead gaze met his through the glass. Her lips parted slightly, but the sound that escaped was not a whisper. It was a deep, low vibration that resonated through the entire chapel. The candles flickered violently, and the air turned electric. "Why did you return?" she breathed. Daniel's voice trembled. "I came to end this. To end you." Rebecca's pale lips curved into a faint smile. "End me? You already began me again." The floor shook beneath him. The old chapel groaned, its wooden beams creaking as if under immense weight. From the cracks in the stone, black mist began to pour out, coiling like smoke around Daniel's feet. It crawled up his legs, ice cold and alive, whispering in voices he could not comprehend. "You're lying," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "The gravekeeper said I could destroy you, he said." Rebecca laughed softly, a hollow echoing sound that chilled him to the bone. "The gravekeeper was part of me. He always was. He was my watcher, my warden, my anchor to this world." Daniel froze. The truth hit him like a physical blow. The gravekeeper hadn't been protecting him. He had been guarding her, keeping her tethered until the right vessel appeared. And that vessel was him. Rebecca's voice grew softer, more human, yet more terrifying for it. "Do you remember the night Emily vanished?" Daniel's breath hitched. "She didn't disappear," Rebecca continued, her tone dripping with both sorrow and malice. "You buried her with your own hands. You thought you were saving her, but you were saving me." Memories flooded Daniel's mind. Flashes of rain, the broken shovel, Emily's terrified eyes as something inside her screamed. He remembered her voice, begging him to end it before it was too late. He had panicked. He had struck her to stop her from hurting herself. The blow had killed her, and in his guilt, he had buried her in Rebecca's grave, exactly where she had wanted to be. The truth clawed at his sanity. Emily hadn't been possessed after she died. She had been the vessel from the start. Rebecca had been waiting inside her all along. Daniel dropped to his knees, clutching his head. No, that's not true." Rebecca's voice came from everywhere at once now, echoing through the rafters. "You sealed the circle with her blood and yours. You finished what I began centuries ago. You gave me life again." The coffin's lid cracked open, a faint hiss escaping as centuries of dust and air were released. Rebecca slowly rose from it, her movements graceful yet unnatural. Her long white gown trailed behind her like mist, her hair floating as though suspended in water. Her once pale skin was now luminous, her beauty otherworldly, and her eyes burned a brilliant poisonous green. Daniel stumbled backward, searching the ground for something, anything to defend himself with. His hand brushed against a rusted iron cross that had fallen from the altar. He grabbed it and held it up between them, his voice shaking. "Stay back." Rebecca tilted her head, almost curious. "Iron? Symbols? You still think those things hold power here?" The cross began to tremble in his hand, heating rapidly until it glowed red. Daniel cried out, dropping it to the floor. The symbol melted into a puddle of molten iron hissing against the stone. She smiled. "This is my ground now." Daniel fell to his knees, despair consuming him. "Then what do you want from me?" Rebecca floated closer, her face softening, not with kindness but with a mockery of it. "You're the final link, Daniel. The circle has always required two hearts, one of the living, one of the damned. Emily gave hers willingly. Now I need yours." Daniel shook his head, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "If you take my heart, what happens to her? To Emily?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "She'll finally rest. That is my gift to you." He hesitated, torn between love and terror. Could he sacrifice himself to free her? Or was this another lie? The lines between truth and illusion had long since blurred. Rebecca extended a hand, her voice turning almost tender. "It's time to finish what you started." But as Daniel's eyes locked with hers, something shifted. Behind her ghostly form, he saw a faint light, soft, warm, golden, and within that light, Emily's true spirit stood, watching him silently. Her expression was no longer blank, it was filled with sorrow and strength. She whispered his name. Daniel. Rebecca froze, her head snapping toward the light. The green in her eyes flickered. The chapel walls shuddered as if reacting to Emily's presence. Emily raised her hand, her voice echoing with ethereal power. You can't keep us both. You promised me freedom. You broke your word. Rebecca hissed, her form flickering violently. You belong to me. You are me. Daniel's heart pounded as realization dawned. Emily wasn't asking him to die. She was asking him to choose, to reject Rebecca's will, to break the curse not by death, but by defiance. He stood, forcing himself to meet Rebecca's burning gaze. You can't control me, not anymore. Rebecca screamed, a sound that shattered the stained glass windows, sending shards raining down like deadly rain. The mist exploded into violent spirals, clawing at the air. The light around Emily grew brighter, spreading like dawn breaking over a battlefield. Daniel took a deep breath, stepped forward, and plunged his hand through the open coffin lid, grabbing the withered rose still lying where Rebecca had been. Its thorns tore into his skin, drawing blood. The black petals began to burn, releasing a cloud of thick, white smoke. Rebecca shrieked, her form unraveling, dissolving into dust and ash that swirled violently before vanishing into nothingness. The chapel walls split apart, beams of light pouring in from the heavens above. And then, silence. The mist was gone. The cold had vanished. The air was still. Daniel collapsed to the floor, gasping. The coffin was empty now, nothing but ashes remained. Emily stood over him, her spirit calm and radiant, her eyes filled with love and relief. You did it, she whispered. You freed us. Tears fell from Daniel's eyes. Stay. Please stay. Emily smiled sadly. I can't. The circle is broken now. But you'll live. That's enough. Her hand brushed his cheek, a touch warm and real, and then her form began to fade into golden light. Goodbye, Daniel. And just like that, she was gone. Daniel sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the coffin, the broken rose still clenched in his bleeding hand. Then, as dawn broke through the shattered windows, he stood and walked out of the chapel. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. The fog had lifted, revealing soft sunlight spilling across the gravestones. The birds were singing again, as if nothing had ever happened. He turned back one last time, watching as the chapel slowly began to crumble into dust, its stones falling silently into the earth. The curse was over, or so he thought. As he walked down the dirt path toward the gate, something caught his eye. A single fresh rose, black as midnight, had grown beside the gatepost. Its petals shimmered faintly in the morning light. Daniel froze, staring at it. Then deep inside his chest, he felt something move. Just once. A heartbeat that wasn't his own. And far away, deep beneath the earth, a soft voice whispered, "The circle is never broken, only renewed." The wind carried the words across the graveyard, vanishing into the distance. What if the dead never wanted peace? What if they only pretended to sleep until someone dared to wake them? That was the question that tore through 16-year-old Evan Cole's mind the night he followed the sound of a bell in the old cemetery. Most towns have ghost stories. Gray Hollow had a living one. The cemetery stretched along the northern ridge, a sea of leaning stones, angel statues with broken faces, and marble tombs eaten by moss. Locals said it was cursed ground. They said that when the moon was right, you could hear a bell toll beneath the dirt, soft, like a heartbeat from under the earth. Nobody went near it after sundown. Nobody except Evan. He'd moved to Gray Hollow only 3 months earlier, dragged there by his widowed mother after his father's death in a construction accident. They rented a house on the edge of town, its back fence touching the rusted gates of the old cemetery. From his bedroom window, Evan could see the tops of gravestones shining under the pale wash of the street lamp. Sometimes he thought he saw movement between them, shadows pacing, stopping, turning their heads. At first he told himself it was wind and weeds, but wind didn't hum and weeds didn't whisper names. The first night it happened, he was awake past midnight, sketching at his desk when he heard it. A faint metallic clink, clink, clink drifting through his open window. He froze. The rhythm was too even for wind, too deliberate for an animal. He stepped to the window, holding his breath. The sound came again, softer now, like something deep in the ground was ringing. His skin prickled. He remembered the stories, how in the 1800s, before medicine was precise, they'd bury people alive by mistake. So families tied a string from the corpse's hand to a bell above the grave. If the dead woke, they could ring for help. And in this cemetery, it was said, one bell had never stopped ringing. Evan closed the window that night and told himself it was his imagination. But the next night, he heard it again. And the night after that. By the fourth night, curiosity overpowered fear. He slipped on a hoodie, grabbed his phone flashlight, and climbed out the window into the damp night air. The gates creaked when he pushed them open, and the hinges screamed like something alive. Cold mist clung to the ground, winding between the graves like a living thing. The moon hung low, half-eaten by shadow. He followed the sound, the faint metallic chiming guiding him deeper between the rows of forgotten tombs. Each step sank into soft earth. Names on the stones blurred under time's decay. Martha Wynne, 1887-1902. Jonathan Cole, no relation. Beloved father. He wondered if the dead cared that no one came anymore. The town had built a new graveyard decades ago. This one was left to rot. The bell grew louder. Then he saw it, a small cast-iron structure at the center of the cemetery, like a miniature chapel with a rusted spire. The sign on the door read, "Caretaker's Office." The bell sound was coming from beneath it. Evan hesitated. He should have turned back. But there was something magnetic about that sound, as if it were calling his name through the dirt. He stepped inside. The air was colder there. Dust coated everything, the shelves lined with old record books, a cracked lantern on the desk, a photograph nailed to the wall of a man in a bowler hat holding a shovel. The caretaker, probably. Under the floorboards, the bell rang again. 3 slow chimes. Evan knelt and pressed his ear to the wood. Definitely below. He found a hatch hidden under a rolled-up rug, its handle rusted shut. When he pulled, the metal screamed but gave way. A breath of stale air rose from the darkness, carrying the scent of rot and damp soil. Steps descended into black. He pointed his flashlight and started down. The stairway twisted beneath the chapel like a throat, narrow and cold. At the bottom, he found a small tunnel with stone walls and wooden supports. His light trembled across an old coffin lying open on the dirt floor. Empty. Chains hung from the beams above, some broken, some with hooks. The bell was there too, dangling from a rope that disappeared into the earth. Evan touched it gently. It swung once, giving a single chime. He crouched to examine the rope's end. It wasn't tied to the wall. It went straight down into the ground, as if connected to something or someone below. He tugged lightly. Something tugged back. He stumbled backward, dropping his phone. The light flickered and went out. For a second there was only silence. Then, faintly, from the darkness below came a voice. "Don't stop ringing." Evan froze. It sounded human, muffled by soil but unmistakable. A woman's voice, strained and wet, as though her mouth was full of earth. He whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Then the rope moved again, sharply, making the bell jingle 3 times in quick succession. "Help me, please." He spun around and ran up the stairs, heart hammering. At the top, he slammed the hatch shut, leaning against it, gasping. The bell below continued to ring, slow, steady, desperate. He sprinted home through the mist, leaping over graves, the ringing following him like an echo. When he climbed through his window, he locked it and buried himself under the covers. But even there, with his pillow pressed to his ears, he could still hear it. Clink, clink, clink. By morning, the sound had stopped. Evan told no one. His mother would think he was losing it. At school, he stared out windows, jumpy at every sound. His friend Lila noticed. She was the only person who treated him like a normal human since his father's death. "You look like hell," she said, sliding into the cafeteria seat across from him. "I didn't sleep." "Nightmares again?" He hesitated. "Something like that." When he finally told her about the bell, she frowned. "My grandpa used to talk about that. Said the caretaker went crazy back in 1925, claimed people were still alive down there. They fired him after he dug up half the graves." "What happened to him?" She shrugged. "They said he disappeared. Some people think he buried himself. Others think something else buried him." That night, Evan couldn't resist going back. He had to know if the voice was real. He brought a crowbar and a flashlight, telling himself he'd only look for a minute. The air was colder than before. As he reached the caretaker's building, the moon vanished behind clouds, leaving everything in a suffocating black. Inside, the hatch seemed to breathe cold mist. The bell was silent. He descended again, slower this time. When he reached the tunnel, he froze. The coffin was no longer empty. Something lay inside it, covered with a torn burial shroud. His flashlight shook. The fabric moved. He took one cautious step forward. The shroud slipped off, revealing a face, gray, sunken, yet still alive. The woman's eyes rolled toward him, pupils white and milked. Her mouth opened with a dry crack. "You heard me," she rasped. "Now you can't leave." The rope jerked. The bell above screamed. And from the walls, dozens of other bells began to ring, some faint, some near, some under his feet. Evan stumbled backward as the floor trembled. Voices rose from the soil, whispering his name. "Evan. Evan Cole. Come down and dig us up." He turned to run, but the hatch above slammed shut by itself, plunging him into complete darkness. The last thing he saw was the woman sitting up in her coffin, grinning with a mouth full of dirt. The sound of the bells filled the underground chamber like 1,000 metal heartbeats. Evan clutched the wall, breath ragged, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The air was thick with dust and the faint stench of decay, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long on a grave. The woman in the coffin had stopped moving, but her eyes never left him. They glowed faintly, reflecting the beam of his light like 2 pale moons. "Please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Who are you?" Her mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You came when I called. That means you heard us. That means you belong here now." He backed away, stumbling over loose stones. I just wanted to help." The bells above and around him began to chime again, faster this time. It was no longer a slow, sorrowful toll. It was chaotic, frenzied, like dozens of hands were yanking on their ropes from beneath the soil. Dust rained from the ceiling. The wooden beams groaned. Evan ran for the stairs and shoved at the hatch, but it wouldn't move. He slammed his shoulder into it again and again, but it felt like something heavy was pressing down from above. He screamed for help, but only the echoes answered. Below, the woman's voice rose over the bells. "He won't let you go." "Who?" Evan shouted. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the darkness of the tunnel, another voice spoke. Low, male, ancient, crawling across the walls like smoke. "The gravedigger. He buried me wrong. He buried all of us wrong." Evan spun toward the sound. His flashlight caught movement at the far end of the tunnel. A tall shadow stood there, broad-shouldered, hunched, holding what looked like a shovel. For a second, Evan thought it might just be a trick of the light. But then it took a step forward, and the sound of the shovel scraping against the dirt echoed through the chamber like nails on a coffin lid. He pointed the light, hand shaking. The figure was dressed in a long, filthy coat and a brimmed hat just like the photograph upstairs. His face was hidden in shadow, but the lower half, what Evan could see, was wrong. The skin looked like damp clay, as though it had been molded and pressed by hand, cracking at the edges. "Who are you?" Evan gasped. The figure's head tilted slowly, the sound of bone grinding faintly in the silence that followed. Then the gravedigger spoke. "You shouldn't have rung my bell, boy." Evan bolted toward the side passage, light bouncing wildly across the walls. The tunnel curved sharply left, leading into another chamber. He stopped, chest heaving. This one was lined with more coffins, some half open, some shattered, some with the ropes of their bells running up into the ceiling. He could see faint movement under a few lids, slow rising and falling as if the dead inside were breathing. The gravedigger's steps echoed closer, slow and deliberate. Clack. Drag. Clack. Drag. Evan realized the man was limping, one leg scraping behind him like a sack of bones. Panicking, he ducked behind a fallen coffin and crouched. His flashlight dimmed, the battery dying. In the faint glow, he saw what was written on the side of the coffin next to him. Samuel Pierce, cemetery caretaker, 1925. The caretaker, the same man from the photograph. He looked again toward the tunnel. The figure's shadow stretched long, reaching almost to his feet. Evan pressed his back to the coffin, trying not to breathe. The gravedigger's voice slithered through the dark. "They told me to stop digging. They said the ground should rest, but the ground never rests. It whispers. It begs." Evan squeezed his eyes shut. The air grew colder, and a faint rattling began under his hands. The coffin he leaned against began to shake. The lid shifted. Something inside pressed upward, slow but strong. "No," Evan whispered. A thin gray hand burst through the crack in the lid, grasping for him. The fingernails were black, the skin paper-thin. Evan scrambled back, dropping his flashlight. It hit the ground and rolled, casting wild, spinning light across the chamber. For just a heartbeat, he saw them, all of them, half-decayed figures sitting up in their coffins, heads tilting, mouths opening soundlessly. Bells swung from their wrists, ringing in unison, creating a metallic symphony of the damned. He grabbed the fallen light and ran. The tunnel twisted, splitting into two paths, one narrow and steep, one wider but descending deeper. He chose the narrow one, ducking under a beam, clawing at the dirt walls for balance. The bells faded behind him, but never fully stopped. He could still hear them, faint and steady, echoing through the earth. After what felt like minutes of crawling, the tunnel opened into a small brick chamber. In the center stood an old stone table, covered in dust and cobwebs. On it lay a book bound in cracked leather. Evan hesitated, then wiped the dust away. The title was carved into the cover, "The Register of the Dead." He flipped it open. Each page listed names, hundreds of them, written in neat, faded ink. But next to every name was a second column marked condition. Some said resting, others said awakened. The last few pages were filled with scrawled handwriting, shakier, darker, almost carved into the paper. He read, The bells do not silence. I hear them in my sleep. They call for air, for light, for justice. I tried to dig them up, but the more I dig, the deeper they go. The ground swallows them whole. It swallows me. Then, at the bottom of the final page, another line had been added in fresher ink, messy, rushed. He is still here. He won't let any of us leave. Evan's breath hitched. His flashlight flickered again. When it steadied, he saw fresh footprints in the dust, large, heavy prints, leading right behind him. He turned slowly. The gravedigger stood in the doorway, shovel in hand, his head nearly scraping the ceiling. His eyes, if they were eyes, burned faintly red through the shadow of his hat. "You opened the book," he rasped. "Now you'll write your name in it." Evan backed toward the wall, searching for another exit. "I don't belong here." "You do now," the gravedigger said, lifting the shovel. "Everyone who hears the bell does." He swung the shovel downward. Evan ducked, the blade slamming into the stone table with a metallic crack. Sparks flew. He lunged forward, shoving past the figure, and bolted into the tunnel again. Behind him, the gravedigger roared, a sound that didn't belong in any human throat. Evan ran until his legs burned. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get out. Then up ahead, he saw faint moonlight seeping through a gap in the wall. He clawed at the loose bricks until they gave way, tumbling out onto the cold grass outside the caretaker's building. He lay there for a moment, gasping under the moonlight, covered in dirt and sweat. The night was still. The bells were silent again. He stumbled home, climbed through his window and collapsed on the floor. His hands were shaking. His mind was a blur. But as he looked down, he noticed something. Mud smeared across his wrists, and tied around one wrist was a thin piece of twine. He didn't remember that being there before. And when the wind blew through the open window, it carried with it a faint, unmistakable sound. Clink. 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 The bell was ringing again, but this time it wasn't coming from the cemetery. It was coming from under his bed. Evan didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the sound came back, soft, distant, but steady. Clink. 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 It echoed in his skull, vibrating through his bones. He sat frozen on the edge of his bed, staring at the floorboards. The twine tied around his wrist felt tighter now, cutting faintly into his skin. He tried to untie it, but the knot wouldn't budge. The string looked new, clean, white, almost fresh. He hadn't tied it. He hadn't even noticed it until minutes ago. When he finally worked up the courage, he leaned over the edge of the bed, flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the dust-covered floor beneath. Nothing moved. No rats, no shadows, just the silence of a house too still for comfort. And then, from the far corner under the bed frame, something gleamed faintly. A small bell. It was identical to the one he'd seen in the caretaker's crypt. Same rusted metal, same pattern etched along its rim, a pattern of tiny interlocked skulls. His breath caught. He reached out slowly, heart pounding, and picked it up. The bell was cold, too cold. When he turned it over, there was dirt caked in its seams as though it had been buried deep underground, and tied to its handle was a single thread of twine, matching the one around his wrist. Evan dropped it instantly. The bell hit the floor, giving a faint chime that made his lights flicker. For a heartbeat, the entire room pulsed with static, like invisible electricity buzzing in the air. His reflection in the window shimmered. Then for a split second, it wasn't him at all. It was the caretaker, the gravedigger, standing where his reflection should be, head slightly bowed, shovel in hand, lips moving in a silent whisper. Evan stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. No, this isn't real. He blinked, and the image was gone. The window only showed the moonlight again, pale and empty. But outside, across the fence, the cemetery seemed different. The mist was thicker now, curling over the tombstones like breathing smoke. Then came a voice, from the corner of his room, soft and low. "You brought it home." Evan froze. "Who's there?" No response. Only the faint squeak of his closet door shifting open by itself. His flashlight beam shook as he pointed it toward the sound. The door creaked wider, revealing the hanging clothes swaying gently. For a second, he thought he saw a shadow crouched between them, a hunched shape with fingers that ended in long, dirty nails. He didn't wait to find out. He bolted downstairs, flipping every light switch he could. His mother's room was empty. She worked night shifts at the clinic. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. He grabbed his phone and dialed Lila. It rang 3 times before her groggy voice answered. "Evan? It's the middle of the night. What's wrong?" He spoke fast, words tripping over each other. "Something followed me home. From the cemetery. There's a bell, it's under my bed." She cut him off. "Slow down. You're not making sense. I'm serious. It's real, Lila. The caretaker, the graves, they're awake. He's awake." There was a pause on the line. Then her voice softened. Okay. I'll come over. Just don't do anything. Stay where you are. Please hurry." The line clicked dead. Evan sank onto the couch, hands buried in his hair. The silence was worse than the sound. Every creak of the house felt alive, every whisper of wind against the window like fingers tracing glass. He looked down again. The twine on his wrist was darker now, stained with something that looked suspiciously like soil. He could smell it too. Damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint scent of lilies, the kind they placed on graves. Then from the hall came another sound. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from upstairs. Evan turned toward the staircase, muscles locked. The steps grew louder, heavier, until a shape appeared at the top of the stairs, small, bent, moving strangely, like a puppet with broken strings. The figure descended 1 step at a time, the wooden boards groaning under its weight. It was a woman, pale. Mud smeared across her face. Her dress was torn, soaked dark at the hem. Evan's stomach turned. He recognized her. The woman from the coffin. She stopped halfway down, head tilting as though listening. Then she smiled, her lips cracking open like old paper. "He knows you, Evan." He couldn't move. "What? Who?" "The one who digs. The one who never stopped digging." Her voice rasped like wind through dry leaves. "You pulled his bell. You opened his gate." "Stay away from me," he whispered. She didn't. She took another step down, and as she did, the lights flickered again. The air temperature dropped so sharply his breath fogged. The bell under the bed rang faintly upstairs, followed by another, and another. Dozens of them, faint, distant, all tolling at once. She reached the bottom step. He's coming for what's his. And then she was gone. Vanished. The air where she stood was empty, save for a faint trail of dirt on the floorboards. Evan backed toward the front door, fumbled with the lock, and yanked it open. The night outside was thick with fog, curling low and heavy. He ran into it barefoot, sprinting down the street toward the faint glow of the streetlights. Behind him, the bells continued to ring. When Lila's car screeched to a stop in front of him minutes later, he nearly collapsed from relief. She jumped out, grabbing his shoulders. "What the hell happened to you? You look, God, you're freezing." "It followed me," he gasped. "It's in my house. The caretaker, he's real." She glanced past him at the house, where the lights still flickered faintly through the fog. "Okay, show me." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to go back, but Lila's face, confident, skeptical, made him feel like maybe he wasn't completely insane. Together they stepped inside. The house was silent. Nothing moved. The bell was gone. They searched every room, but everything was in its place. No dirt, no footprints, no strange sounds. It looked as if nothing had happened. Lila crossed her arms. "Evan, maybe it's stress. After your dad and all this creepy cemetery stuff, maybe your brain's just... I'm not crazy, he shouted. She sighed. Okay. Then show me where you saw the bell. He led her upstairs, hands trembling, and knelt beside the bed. Nothing. Just clean floorboards. It was right here, he whispered. Lila crouched too, peering under. There's nothing, Evan. He started to protest, but then she frowned. Wait. Her hand brushed something in the shadows. She pulled it out. A book, old, with a cracked leather cover. Evan's blood turned to ice. He knew that book, the Register of the Dead. He'd left it in the crypt. Lila opened it, flipping to the last page. Her voice was barely a whisper. Evan. There, written in fresh black ink, was a new entry. Evan Cole, condition, pending. Evan's hands shook. No, I didn't write that. Before she could answer, the bell rang again. Louder this time. Not from under the bed, but from inside the walls. The sound grew deafening, echoing through the house like an alarm from hell itself. Lights burst, glass shattered, and from the shadows spilling across the floor, a dark figure began to rise, the outline of a shovel gleaming in its grip. The caretaker was standing in Evan's room. He lifted his head slowly, and though his lips didn't move, his voice filled the room, deep, guttural, and final. You shouldn't have taken my book. For a long second, everything stood still. The air, the flickering light, even the dust hanging mid-air like suspended ash. The caretaker's figure loomed in the doorway, shovel clutched tightly in his skeletal hands. His hat hid most of his face, but what little light touched it revealed that same cracked earthen skin, as if his flesh had long since turned to clay. The bell sound seemed to pulse around him, growing louder, faster, syncing with Evan's pounding heartbeat. Lila stood frozen beside the bed, the open ledger trembling in her hands. Evan pulled her backward, his voice shaking. Run. They darted toward the hall, but the door slammed shut with a deafening thud, as though the house itself obeyed the thing that had followed them. The windows rattled violently, curtains whipping as if a storm had erupted inside the room. The caretaker took one slow step forward, his boots leaving trails of wet soil on the floorboards. His voice rolled out low, gravelly, like something crawling from a coffin. You can't run from the ground that holds your name. He lifted one hand, and the book in Lila's grasp flew from her fingers, snapping shut mid-air before landing on the desk. It opened by itself, to the page with Evan's name. The word pending glowed faintly red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Evan's throat closed. He felt a sudden weight on his chest, like invisible hands pressing down, stealing his breath. He fell to his knees, gasping. The twine around his wrist tightened by itself, digging into his skin until tiny beads of blood appeared. Lila screamed, trying to pull him up, but an unseen force shoved her back. She slammed against the wall, knocking a framed photo to the floor. The caretaker's shadow stretched across the room, impossibly long, reaching both of them at once. Let him go, she shouted, grabbing the fallen lamp and hurling it at the figure. It passed straight through him like smoke. The caretaker turned his hollow gaze toward her. You shouldn't have opened his page. The lights exploded. Everything went black. Evan blinked, disoriented. When his vision adjusted, he wasn't in his room anymore. The smell hit first, earth, mildew, and rot. He was back underground, the crypt. The walls were the same damp stone, the same coffin in the corner, but there was no hatch above, only solid dirt. He looked around wildly. Lila was gone. He shouted her name, voice echoing through the tunnels. Silence answered. Then, faintly, he heard her. Evan, help me. He ran toward the sound, his shoes splashing through cold puddles. The tunnels twisted and branched like a maze, lined with wooden supports slick with age. The bells were ringing again, hundreds of them, each one tolling a different rhythm. It was like the earth itself was breathing, wheezing through metal lungs. He turned a corner and froze. Lila stood at the far end of the passage, half in shadow. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. He's coming, she whispered. Who? She lifted a shaking hand, pointing behind him. Evan turned, and there he was. The caretaker filled the tunnel, stooped under the ceiling, shovel dragging in the dirt. His eyes glowed faintly red, and when he spoke, his words scraped the air. They all wanted to rest, but the ground doesn't forget, neither do I. Evan grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her toward another tunnel. They sprinted blindly, twisting through the underground labyrinth. The deeper they ran, the louder the bells became until the sound was unbearable. Every wall, every coffin, every inch of dirt seemed to pulse with it. Finally, they stumbled into a large chamber. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, barely burning. In its dim light stood an enormous stone altar carved with names. Hundreds of names, etched deep into the surface, some scratched out, others half erased. At the center was a hole, perfectly round, about 6 feet wide, descending into blackness. Evan approached slowly. The air pouring out was freezing. Inside he saw movement, like something writhing just below the surface. "What is this place?" Lila whispered. Evan shook his head. "I don't know, but I think this is where he buried them." She crouched beside the altar, brushing dust from one of the names. Her eyes widened. "Evan, this is your last name. Cole." He froze. That can't be. But there it was. Thomas Cole, Margaret Cole, and beneath those, Evan Cole. He stumbled back, heart hammering. "No, that's not possible. Those can't be." Lila looked up, face pale. "Your dad's name was Thomas, right?" He swallowed hard. "Yeah, but he's buried in the city cemetery, not here." The caretaker's voice came from behind them, echoing through the chamber. "They all come here eventually." They spun around. The lantern flickered violently as he stepped into the light, the shovel scraping along the floor. "When I was alive, I tried to keep the dead in their graves. But they called to me. They said they weren't ready. I heard them. Every night. I tried to help." His voice grew softer, almost mournful. "But when I dug, they wouldn't stop screaming. So I buried them deeper, buried their voices, buried myself." He raised his head. "Now I need someone to take my place." The ground trembled. The hole in the altar began to expand, dirt crumbling away as skeletal hands reached out from within. One by one, figures clawed their way up. Gray, decomposed, eyes empty but staring. They weren't attacking. They were reaching for Evan. Lila screamed, grabbing his arm, but he couldn't move. The twine on his wrist was glowing now, the same faint red as his name in the book. The corpses whispered in unison, "Write your name. Finish it. Stay." Evan shook his head violently. "No, I'm not one of you." The caretaker extended the shovel toward him. Its blade dripped black soil that hissed when it hit the ground. "You heard the bell. That means the ground has already chosen you." The corpses began to close in, their hands brushing his clothes, cold and wet. Lila swung a rusted chain at them, keeping them at bay, yelling, "We have to get out of here." Evan's eyes darted to a passage behind the altar, a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for one person. That way. They sprinted through it, dirt raining down as the tunnel quaked behind them. The caretaker's voice followed, deep and thunderous. "You can't outrun the soil, boy. It remembers your every step." The tunnel opened suddenly into another room, a smaller crypt filled with broken coffins and rusted tools. In the center was something that didn't belong, a large metal door embedded into the wall like a vault. Words were carved above it, nearly worn away. "Seal the restless." Lila's hands fumbled for the latch. "It's locked." Evan looked around desperately. Then he saw it, a ring of keys hanging from a hook near a pile of bones. He grabbed it, tried each one until finally, the lock clicked. The door swung open with a groan. Beyond was a narrow stone staircase leading upward, faint moonlight visible at the top. They didn't hesitate. They climbed, lungs burning, hearts pounding. Behind them, the caretaker roared, the sound shaking the earth. "You can climb all you want, but every step brings you closer to the grave." They burst through a broken mausoleum door into the open air. The night was thick with fog, but it was still night, still real. They were back in the old cemetery. The gate stood in the distance, glinting faintly. They ran. Neither spoke. The bells were still ringing behind them, distant but constant, like an army of ghosts following their every move. When they finally reached the edge of the cemetery, Lila stopped, gasping. "We made it." Evan turned to look back. Through the mist, he could still see the caretaker standing among the graves, shovel in hand, watching them. His voice drifted on the wind, soft, almost kind. "It's not over, Evan. The ground never lets go." And then he vanished into the fog. Evan and Lila stared at the empty cemetery, the silence heavy and unnatural. For the first time, the bells had stopped. But when they turned to leave, Evan noticed something in the dirt by the gate. A fresh grave, the soil still loose. A small wooden marker stuck at its head. He brushed the dirt away, squinting at the carved letters. It read, Evan Cole, 2025. And beneath it, carved crudely in the wood, were 3 words. He is chosen. The fog clung to the air like breath on glass. Evan stood frozen before his own grave, his knees weakening under the weight of the revelation. The wooden marker swayed gently in the wind, the fresh earth beneath it still moist. Evan Cole, 2025. The sight made his stomach twist. It felt less like a prophecy and more like a signature already sealed by fate. Lila crouched beside it, running her trembling fingers through the soil. "Evan, this isn't just some twisted prank. This grave, it's waiting for you." He swallowed hard, glancing back toward the cemetery where the caretaker had disappeared into the mist. He said, "The ground remembers my name. What if this isn't just a curse? What if my family's been part of it all along?" The fog thickened, rolling over the tombstones like ghostly waves. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching and twisting as if whispering secrets they couldn't hear. The silence was deafening. No crickets, no wind, not even the creak of trees. Just the heavy, suffocating stillness of a place that had seen too much death. Lila pulled out her phone. Its screen cracked from their earlier escape. There has to be a record of this place. Someone must have written about it. She typed furiously, scrolling through the poor signal until her eyes widened. "Evan, listen to this." She read aloud from a faded newspaper clipping posted online. 1873, Gravekeepers Massacre at Black Hollow Cemetery. A local gravedigger named Elijah Cole reportedly killed 7 mourners. After claiming the dead were speaking to him, he vanished before he could be captured. Locals sealed the cemetery and cursed the Cole bloodline for disturbing the eternal rest of the dead. Evan's breath hitched. Elijah Cole. Cole. Lila nodded grimly. "Your ancestor." He felt the ground shift slightly beneath his feet, like the soil itself acknowledged the name. The realization hit him like a cold blade. His family wasn't just connected to the cemetery. They had built it. He tried to think back. His father, Thomas Cole, had always avoided talking about their ancestors. When Evan once asked about family history, his father simply said, "Some roots are better left buried." It hadn't meant much then, but now, it was beginning to sound like a warning. The air around them seemed to grow colder. Lila grabbed his arm. "We can't stay here. Let's go back to town. Find records, old property deeds, anything that can tell us the truth." They walked quickly through the fog, every step feeling heavier than the last. The iron gate moaned as they pushed it open, its hinges crying like something in pain. But as they stepped onto the gravel road beyond, Evan noticed something strange. The town below looked different. The distant streetlights flickered dimly, their glow yellow and weak, as if filtered through another era. The houses lining the road were old, wooden porches sagging, windows boarded up. No cars, no sound of electricity. Even the air smelled of coal smoke and rain-soaked earth. "Lila," Evan whispered. "This doesn't look like home." Lila turned slowly, eyes wide. Evan, I think we didn't leave. I think the cemetery brought us back in time. They walked cautiously down the dirt road, the night pressing closer. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, slow, hollow, and mournful. It wasn't an electronic chime. It was a real bell, deep and resonant. The sound sent chills racing down Evan's spine. They passed a row of graves that hadn't been there before, newer, cleaner, the names sharp and freshly carved. One of them caught his eye. Elijah Cole, born 1839, died 1873. But as they looked closer, they saw that the word died had been scratched out, violently. In its place was one word, carved over and over in rough letters, waiting. Before either of them could speak, a voice echoed softly from behind the grave. You shouldn't be here. A man stepped into view, tall, gaunt, wearing a gravedigger's coat. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and his hands were stained with earth. Evan recognized him immediately, the caretaker. But he looked younger now, his face less decayed, though still bearing that eerie stillness of someone long dead. Who are you? Evan demanded. The man tilted his head. You know who I am. The name runs through your veins. Elijah. Cole, Lila whispered. He gave a slow, cold smile. Once. But names don't mean much when time doesn't move. Evan stepped forward. Why are you doing this to me? What do you want? Elijah's eyes glinted like frost. Want? I wanted peace. I wanted the voices to stop. But they never did. They begged me to dig to free them from their boxes. When I tried, the town called me a murderer. They buried me alive in my own cemetery. His smile vanished, replaced by something far darker. Now I'm giving my bloodline what it deserves. The same soil, the same silence. The ground beneath them began to tremble, the earth cracking open around the graves. Cold wind howled through the cemetery, carrying the faint, awful sound of whispering. Dozens of voices, men, women, children, crying out, "Bury him, bury the last Cole." Evan grabbed Lila's hand. Run. They sprinted between the graves as the earth split behind them, skeletal arms reaching from below. Each hand clawed the ground, grasping at air, dragging itself upward. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears, the cemetery shifting like a living organism. They reached the chapel at the far end, a rotting wooden structure leaning to one side. The doors slammed open as they neared, revealing rows of dusty pews and broken glass. Inside, the air was suffocatingly cold. Lila pushed the doors shut, bolting them with a rusted iron rod. What now? Evan collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. There has to be a way to break it, something that binds the curse. The chapel's altar was covered in black candles, each burning with a pale blue flame. Behind it hung a massive, tattered tapestry showing a tree with twisted roots that looked eerily familiar. At its center was a name, Cole Family Burial Grounds. Evan approached slowly, running his hand along the fabric. The roots of the tree extended downward into what looked like coffins, and in one of them near the center was an empty outline with his initials beside it. Suddenly, the ground beneath the altar cracked open, sending a shock through the floorboards. A faint red glow pulsed below. Lila stumbled backward, eyes wide. Evan, look! From the fissure rose a single hand, pale, with the same twine wrapped around its wrist. The same twine Evan wore. The hand gripped the air, then began to pull. Slowly, a figure began to emerge, covered in dirt and blood, but unmistakably human. It was Evan. The second Evan's eyes snapped open. Lila screamed, backing away, her voice trembling. Evan, what is that? The real Evan stared at his double, his body frozen. The thing that looked like him tilted its head, a slow, unnatural smile spreading across its face. He's already dead, it said in a hollow whisper. I'm what comes next. The candles flickered violently, the entire chapel shuddering as the duplicate stepped forward. Elijah's voice echoed from somewhere unseen, merging with the storm outside. Every Cole must return to the ground, one to dig, and one to stay. Evan lunged for the altar cross, holding it up as the shadow version of himself advanced. The air grew thick, electric, the room spinning with the sound of howling souls. Lila shouted his name, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. The last thing Evan saw before the light consumed everything was his doppelganger's cold, knowing grin, and the faint whisper, close to his ear. "You were born to bury yourself." There was no light, no air, no sound. Evan opened his eyes into darkness so thick it felt solid, like a shroud pressed against his face. He tried to move but couldn't. His arms were pinned to his sides, his legs stiff. Panic surged through him as his lungs screamed for air. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The air smelled of damp soil and rot. Then realization hit like lightning. He wasn't lying on something. He was lying in something. A coffin. His chest heaved. Dirt shifted around him, pressing tighter with every shallow breath. His fingernails scraped wood, splintering as he tried to push upward. But it was useless. The box creaked under his struggle, and soil began to trickle through cracks above him, filling the small space like an hourglass of death. His pulse thundered in his ears. He was going to die here, alone, underground, like Elijah Cole before him. Then, a sound. Soft, rhythmic. Clink, clink, clink. The bell. It rang faintly, muffled by the earth, but close, so close that he could feel its vibration through the coffin walls. And then a voice followed, distant but familiar. "Evan, can you hear me?" He froze. It was Lila's voice. "Lila," he croaked, his throat raw and dry. "Help me, I'm buried." Her voice was faint, distorted, as if carried by wind through water. "I'm trying to reach you. You're not gone yet. Listen to me. You're between." "Between what?" "Between the living and the dead. The cemetery isn't just a place, Evan. It's a gate." His heart pounded as her voice flickered in and out like a dying signal. "You can't dig out," she continued. "You have to remember. The curse isn't about death, it's about memory. You need to find the first grave." "What first grave?" "Your ancestors. The one who started it all. Elijah's grave isn't where he was buried. It's where he was bound." The voice began to fade, replaced by a low rumble that shook the coffin walls. "Lila, don't go," he shouted, pounding the wood until his knuckles bled. But the only response was the whispering of countless unseen mouths just beyond the coffin, murmuring his name. Then, without warning, the coffin cracked open. Evan gasped as light burst through the seams, not sunlight, but a pale blue glow. The soil above him dissolved like smoke, revealing an endless expanse of fog. He floated upward, coughing, clawing his way into a world that looked like the cemetery, but not the one he'd known. Everything was reversed. The trees hung upside down, their roots stretching toward the sky. Tombstones floated in midair, tethered by chains of bone. The air shimmered with faces, transparent, sorrowful, whispering prayers in forgotten tongues. Evan stumbled forward, barefoot on a ground that wasn't solid. It felt like walking on the surface of a dream. Somewhere in the distance, he saw the chapel again, but its roof twisted upward into the fog, like an endless spire. He heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw her, Lila. But something was wrong. Her eyes were pale, her skin colorless. Her clothes hung loosely, moving as if underwater. "Lila," he whispered. She tilted her head slightly. "You found the in-between." "Where am I?" "In the place where souls wait," she said softly. "Where the Cole curse feeds." Evan's voice shook. "Are you real?" She smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" Before he could answer, the fog behind her shifted, and from it emerged Elijah Cole. But here he was more than a man. His form towered, his body draped in the tattered robes of a gravedigger, his shovel glowing faintly red along its blade. Dozens of bells hung from his coat, each one tolling softly, creating a sound that made Evan's skin crawl. "You crossed into my realm," Elijah said, voice deep as thunder. "Few of our blood have dared." Evan stepped back. "This isn't your world. It's a nightmare. Elijah chuckled darkly. Nightmares are dreams that survived burial. He raised the shovel, its tip scraping the fog like metal on glass. You can't destroy the curse, Evan. You are its beating heart. Our line was chosen to keep the dead bound to this ground. Without us, the gate collapses and the dead will rise for real. Evan shook his head violently. You're lying. You're using me. Am I? Elijah's eyes flashed red. You felt them, didn't you? The bells, the whispers. Every time one rang, another spirit stayed silent. We're not the monsters. They are. We dig, so the world above can sleep. Evan's breath caught. Could it be true? Was Elijah not cursing him, but trying to save humanity? Lila's ghostly form flickered beside him. Don't listen to him, Evan. He's twisted by the grave. He's the gatekeeper, but the gate doesn't need to exist. Break it, and everyone, living and dead, will be free. Elijah slammed the shovel into the ground. The sound echoed through the mist like a cannon blast. Break it, he growled, and you'll doom the living to walk beside the dead forever. The ground split beneath them. Two paths opened in opposite directions, one lined with gravestones glowing faintly gold, the other with shadows and crimson mist. Lila grabbed his arm. We have to go to the golden path. That's the way out. Trust me. Elijah's voice thundered behind them. Step there and you'll forget who you are. You'll lose everything, including her. Evan's heart pounded. He looked between them, Lila's desperate, pleading eyes and Elijah's cold, knowing stare. Why me? He demanded. Why does it always come back to me? Elijah took a step closer. Because you were the firstborn after the last bell fell silent. You are the echo of the curse. Your death will end it, or begin it again. The fog swirled violently, forming ghostly shapes that reached for him. Lila screamed, pulling him toward the golden path. Evan, now, you have to trust me. He ran. The air thickened around him, pulling him down, but he forced his legs to move. The bells on Elijah's coat began to toll in unison, an awful, dissonant symphony that made the ground quake. Evan reached the golden path just as a massive hand, Elijah's, burst from the ground, clawing at his leg. You can't leave, Elijah roared. You'll wake the sleepers. Evan kicked free, stumbling into the light. For a moment, the world shattered into blinding brilliance. He screamed, falling through it, then silence. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing in his own bedroom. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds. The birds outside were singing. He sat up, heart racing, drenched in sweat. His wrist still bore the faint mark of the twine, now frayed and loose. On the floor beside his bed lay the small rusted bell. But this time, it didn't ring. Lila burst through the door, tears in her eyes. Evan, you're alive. He stared at her, dazed. Lila, was it real? She hugged him tightly, whispering against his ear. It doesn't matter, you're back. He tried to believe it. He tried to tell himself it was over. But then his gaze drifted toward the window, toward the cemetery in the distance. The fog had returned, and deep within it, barely visible, stood the silhouette of a man holding a shovel, watching. Evan's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down, expecting a text, but the screen displayed something else entirely, a single notification in a blank message window. Your condition has been updated. The register of the dead. The bell on the floor trembled once, softly. Clink. Evan closed his eyes. He already knew what it meant. The curse wasn't over. It had only changed hands. The sky was bruised with gray by the time evening fell, the sun sinking beneath the clouds like a dying ember. Evan sat on his bed, the bell clutched tightly in his palm. He hadn't spoken in hours. Lila hovered near the doorway, watching him with cautious eyes, as if he might vanish again at any moment. Evan, she said quietly, you need to eat something. You've been sitting there since morning. He didn't answer. The bell in his hand was growing colder, almost painfully so. It hadn't rung since dawn, but he could feel it, vibrating faintly like it was alive. Every few seconds, the temperature in the room dropped a little more. "Lila," he murmured finally, voice hoarse. "What if we didn't escape? What if we never left?" She frowned. "You're talking nonsense. You're here. It's over." But even as she spoke, the light bulb above them flickered. Then again. Then again. Evan raised his eyes toward it. For a brief moment, he could have sworn he saw shadows moving inside the light, like hands pressing against glass. The bulb popped with a sharp crack, plunging the room into darkness. Lila jumped, grabbing her phone to turn on the flashlight. The beam caught Evan's face, his eyes hollow, skin pale as chalk. "Did you see that?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "It's starting again." Before she could respond, a sound echoed from downstairs, a soft creak, like the slow opening of a door. Then footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Evan stood up, heart pounding. "Stay here," he said. "Are you crazy? You're not going down there alone." But he was already halfway to the stairs, the wooden steps moaning beneath his weight. The living room below was dimly lit by the glow of the street lamp outside. The air felt heavier, almost metallic. The front door was open. Cold wind howled through the doorway, scattering papers across the floor. The fog had returned, curling into the house in thin, ghostly tendrils. "Evan," Lila whispered behind him, "you locked that door last night." He swallowed hard. "I know." They stepped closer, and that's when they saw it. Muddy footprints leading from the door into the hallway. They were large, heavy, and uneven, as if made by someone dragging one leg. The trail led straight toward the kitchen, where the light flickered faintly. Lila gripped his arm. "Don't." But Evan couldn't stop. He followed the trail into the kitchen and froze. On the counter lay the register of the dead. The same book he'd seen in the caretaker's crypt, its cover cracked and flaking, pages yellowed and wet. It shouldn't have been there. He'd left it in the graveyard. The book flipped open on its own. The pages turned rapidly, faster and faster, until they stopped at the very last entry. Evan leaned in, dreading what he'd see. Under his name, a single new line had been added. Condition: awaiting burial. He stepped back, the room spinning. The floor beneath his feet pulsed once, then began to move. The tiles rippled like water, darkening as mud seeped up through the cracks. Lila screamed, grabbing him by the wrist. "Evan, the floor!" The kitchen erupted into chaos. Shadows spilled across the walls, taking form, figures of the dead, faces twisted in eternal screams. The room smelled of rot and decay. The air buzzed with whispering voices, low and countless, repeating the same words again and again. "Return to the earth. Return to the earth." Evan's head throbbed. The sound was inside his skull, in his bones. He dropped to his knees, clutching his temples. "Make it stop!" Lila dragged him toward the hallway, but the mud was spreading, thick and black, gripping at their ankles. From the front door a shadow loomed, tall, unmistakable. The caretaker. Elijah Cole stood there, shovel gleaming like a mirror of night, eyes glowing faintly red beneath the brim of his hat. "You can't run from what you are," he said, voice echoing through the house. "Every Cole belongs to the soil." Lila stepped in front of Evan, trembling but defiant. "You've tortured him enough. Take me instead." Elijah's gaze flickered toward her, then back to Evan. "It's not about sacrifice. It's about balance." He lifted the shovel, and as he did, the walls of the house seemed to dissolve, replaced by rows of gravestones. The floor became earth, the ceiling a low gray sky. The house was gone. They were standing in the old cemetery again. Evan staggered backward, disoriented. No, I'm not doing this again. I'm not." Elijah raised the shovel high. "Then the dead will come for you." The ground erupted. Dozens of skeletal hands broke through the soil, clawing upward. Faces followed, half-rotted, eyes empty, mouths gaping as they reached for him. Evan grabbed Lila's hand and pulled her toward the chapel in the distance, the same one from before, though now its bell tower was broken and leaning. They ran, the dead swarming behind them, their moans filling the night. The fog thickened, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. The chapel doors slammed shut just as they reached it. Evan pounded on them with his fists. "Open up, please." The doors creaked and gave way. They stumbled inside. The interior was transformed, no longer ruined but pristine, candles burning brightly, the air filled with incense. At the altar stood a figure in a white cloak. Evan froze. "Dad?" Thomas Cole turned toward him, face pale and weary. His eyes were sunken, his hands shaking. "You shouldn't have come here, son." Lila gasped. "He's alive?" Thomas smiled sadly. "Not anymore. I never left the cemetery." Evan's throat tightened. You knew about all this, didn't you?" "I tried to stop it," Thomas said. "But the curse doesn't die with knowledge. It needs blood." He stepped closer, reaching into his coat and pulling out a bell, identical to the one Evan held. "Every generation must bury the next or the gate stays open. I buried my father. Now you must bury me." Evan stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No, I can't." Thomas placed the bell in his hand. "You already have." The bell chimed once softly. Thomas smiled and began to turn to dust before Evan's eyes. His body dissolved into gray ash that scattered into the air like smoke. The chapel lights flickered. Lila screamed as the ground split open beneath the altar, revealing a pit of swirling darkness. Evan dropped the bell, falling to his knees. "I didn't mean to. Dad!" The caretaker's voice echoed from the pit. "Every coal must return to the ground." Evan's reflection appeared in the altar's golden cross, but it wasn't him. It was the other Evan, the one who'd crawled from the grave in the in-between. He grinned, eyes hollow. "It's time," the reflection whispered. Lila grabbed Evan's arm. "We have to end it. Destroy the bell. Now." He looked down at it, trembling. The small rusted object glowed faintly in his hand, pulsing like a heartbeat. He raised it high, ready to smash it against the altar, but froze. In the reflection of the bell, he saw not his face, but Lila's, dead, buried, decayed. The caretaker's voice whispered softly beside his ear. "Destroy it, and she goes with it." Evan's grip faltered. Lila stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "Evan, don't listen. I'm not afraid. End it." He hesitated for a single heartbeat. Then, with a scream that tore through the chapel, he slammed the bell into the ground. Light exploded. The world shattered. Evan felt himself falling, down, 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 through earth, through stone, through centuries of buried bones. He didn't stop until he landed in darkness again. But this time, there was no coffin, no soil, only silence. Then, from somewhere deep above, he heard it. The faint toll of a single bell. Clink, and then another, and another, each one closer than the last. There was no air, no light, no sound except the dull, rhythmic tolling of the bells above. Evan's body was weightless, suspended in a darkness so thick it felt alive. When he opened his mouth to scream, only soil filled his lungs. But he wasn't choking. He was breathing it. The earth had become part of him. His thoughts drifted between dreams and memory, his father's words echoing like a broken prayer. Every coal belongs to the soil. He remembered the bell breaking, the world collapsing, Lila's voice screaming his name. Then nothing, just silence. Now something stirred in that silence. A whisper, soft as a dying breath. "Evan." He turned, or at least thought he did. From the blackness, a pale figure emerged, glowing faintly like a candle in fog. It was Lila. Her dress was torn, her skin ashen, her eyes, beautiful, yet filled with unbearable sorrow. "Lila," he gasped, "you're alive." But she shook her head. "No, not anymore." Evan's chest tightened. "Then where are we?" "In the hollow," she said. "Between life and death. Between the last toll and the first silence." He looked around, but there was nothing. Only endless black stretching in every direction, and beneath it the faint echo of the earth breathing. Lila stepped closer. The curse didn't die with the bell. It only awakened the truth. What truth? She raised her hand. "Look." The darkness around them began to move, slowly at first, then with violent ripples. It twisted and folded until it became something else. The cemetery. But not as they had seen it. This was older, untouched by time. Freshly dug graves lined the hills, their wooden markers carved by trembling hands. Evan recognized one of them. The name read, Thomas Cole, 1872, 1911. He frowned. "That's not right. My father—" Lila touched his arm gently. "Your father wasn't the first Thomas Cole. There were others. Many others. Every generation repeated the same name, the same story. A Cole always returned to bury the dead, and each one thought they could escape the curse." Evan stared at the graves stretching endlessly through the mist. Every single one bore the same last name. Cole. His voice trembled. "So, it was never about my father or the caretaker. It's about us. All of us." She nodded slowly. The curse was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be remembered. Suddenly, the sky cracked open above them like shattered glass, and through it poured visions, blinding flashes of the past. He saw the first gravekeeper, Elijah Cole, digging a hole beneath a storm. He saw villagers carrying torches, screaming that the dead would not stay buried. He saw coffins rising in the night, lids rattling as if something inside wanted to escape. And in every vision, the same bell tolled, binding the souls of the dead to the land. Then came the voice, deep, ancient, echoing from every direction. "The keeper of the bell must feed the earth, or the earth will feed on the living." Evan fell to his knees, gripping his head. "No more, I won't be part of this." Lila crouched beside him, her face filled with both love and despair. "You can't refuse what you are, but you can choose what becomes of it." "How?" "The bell connects the living and the dead. It can end the cycle, but only with sacrifice. The curse demands balance. If you stay here, trapped between, the dead will rest. The cemetery will sleep, forever." He froze. "You mean I have to stay here? Alone?" Lila smiled faintly, tears glistening like dew. "Not alone." Her hand touched his cheek, warm for the first time. Then without another word, she pressed her lips to his forehead. Light burst from her body, wrapping around him like a cocoon. The darkness screamed and shattered. When he opened his eyes, he was standing at the old cemetery again. But everything was different. The sky was clear. The grass was green. The graves were peaceful, untouched by decay. Birds sang softly in the distance. The caretaker, Elijah Cole, stood nearby. His form was transparent, fading like smoke. "You did what I never could," he said quietly. "You gave the dead their peace." Evan looked around, confused. "Then, it's over?" Elijah nodded. "For them, yes, but every keeper must have a grave." Before Evan could speak, the ground beneath him glowed faintly. He looked down and saw his own name carved into a fresh headstone. Evan Cole, 1998, 2024. His breath caught. No, I can't." Elijah stepped closer. "You already did, the moment you broke the bell." Evan's vision blurred. His hands were turning pale, transparent. He felt himself fading, weight lifting from his bones. In the distance, he saw Lila standing among the graves, smiling softly. "Come with me," she said. He reached for her hand, and the world dissolved into light. When the morning sun rose over Hollowfield, the townspeople awoke to find the cemetery gates standing open for the first time in decades. The fog was gone. The air smelled of rain and pine. Inside, a new gravestone stood at the heart of the cemetery. It bore only 2 words: "The Keeper Rests." No one knew who carved it, or when. The bell that had once hung in the chapel tower was found cracked and silent beside it. And yet, sometimes, on cold autumn nights, when the wind passes through the trees, those who live near the edge of town swear they can still hear it, faintly tolling in the distance. A slow, solemn chime. Clink, clink. And if you listen closely enough, beneath the echo of the bell, you can almost hear a whisper rising from the graves. 2 voices together, forever bound to the earth. Every coal belongs to the soil. Have you ever heard a dead man whisper your name? That's how it started for Ethan Cole, one rainy night standing before an old cemetery gate that should have been locked for decades. Ethan wasn't supposed to be there. He was a journalist, sure, but not one of those fearless types who hunted ghosts or chased murderers. No, he wrote about forgotten towns, lost highways, and America's strange corners that most people preferred not to think about. But when he got an anonymous email reading, "If you want the story of your life, come to Hollow Creek Cemetery tonight at 11:13 p.m. Come alone," he couldn't resist. The cemetery lay 3 miles outside Hollow Creek, a town barely breathing on the edge of Kentucky woods. Locals whispered about it, the place where no bird dared land, where fog rolled in even on windless days, and where people sometimes heard the dead calling for help. Ethan parked his rusted Chevy by the crooked iron gates. His flashlight beam cut through the mist, landing on a wooden sign that read, "Hollow Creek Cemetery, Eastern 1892. The letters were almost erased by time. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the gate. It was cold, colder than the rain, colder than November. He felt something. A vibration? No, more like a faint hum beneath his fingertips, like a heartbeat pulsing from the metal. He almost turned back, but then a whisper brushed past his ear. "Ethan." He froze. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The wind didn't answer, but the gate creaked open by itself, as if inviting him in. Inside, the cemetery stretched like a sea of darkness. Tombstones leaned at impossible angles. Names had been eaten by moss and time. The fog curled between them like living smoke. Ethan followed the narrow gravel path deeper in, guided by the dim beam of his flashlight. He could hear something else now, soft murmuring like dozens of voices talking just beneath the ground. When he crouched down, pressing his ear to the cold earth, he could almost make out words. "Help us. Help us." He jerked back, breath fogging in the air. This was no prank. A flash of movement caught his eye. A figure standing by a large oak tree near the back of the cemetery. "Hey!" Ethan shouted. "Who are you?" No answer. The figure didn't move. It looked like a man wearing a long coat, maybe in his 50s. Ethan started toward him, boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. The closer he got, the more wrong everything felt. The fog thickened, swallowing the headstones behind him. His flashlight flickered. When it came back on, the figure was gone. In its place stood an open grave, freshly dug. The soil around it was dark and wet, as if turned over just hours ago. A wooden coffin sat inside, half buried. Its lid was cracked open, revealing blackness inside. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "This has to be a setup," he muttered. "Some sick joke." He knelt down, gripping the edge of the coffin. Inside, there was no body, only a voice. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan." He stumbled backward, falling into the mud. The voice had come from the coffin, low, raspy, and close enough to make his bones ache. He scrambled to his feet, looking around wildly. "Who's there?" But there was no one. Only the fog, only the graves. and that open coffin whispering his name again. Then he saw it, a piece of paper lying on the coffin lid. It was soaked, but a few words were still visible. Find the headstone with your name, before sunrise. Ethan's breath hitched. He looked around. Hundreds of headstones surrounded him, stretching into the mist. The sound of whispers grew louder, coming from all directions now. Find it. Find it, before they do. He turned and ran, scanning headstones with his flashlight. Each one bore strange carvings, dates scratched out, names half erased. Some stones were cracked open, revealing hollows like empty eyes. Then, he froze. There it was, a tall, pristine headstone, untouched by age. The letters were freshly carved. Ethan Colborn, June 4th, 1988. Died November 3rd, 2025. His flashlight slipped from his hand. The beam swung wildly across the fog as his mind went blank. No, this isn't possible. He ran his fingers over the letters. They were real, deeply cut into the marble. He stumbled backward, gasping for air. His watch ticked 11:59 p.m., and then, somewhere behind him, a shovel struck dirt. Once, twice. He turned slowly. The man in the long coat was back. This time Ethan could see his face pale as ash, eyes hollow like empty graves. The man smiled. You're late. Before Ethan could react, the ground beneath him caved in. He fell, down into darkness, into earth that felt alive, clutching at him like hands. He screamed, but the fog swallowed the sound whole. The last thing he saw was the man's face leaning over the hole, whispering, "Welcome home, Ethan." Then everything went black. When Ethan regained consciousness, everything was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows sleep or shock, but a silence so thick it felt like it had weight, pressing against his skull. He blinked several times, his eyes adjusting to a faint grayish light filtering through cracks above. He was underground. The air was heavy with the smell of damp soil and rot. His fingers brushed against coarse dirt, splinters of wood, and something softer, something that felt like fabric. He turned his flashlight on. Its weak beam revealed that he was lying inside a narrow wooden box, a coffin, half filled with soil. Panic surged through him like a jolt of electricity. He slammed his palms against the lid, but it barely budged. He screamed until his throat burned, kicking and thrashing, but the only response was the soft rain of dirt falling through the cracks above. He wasn't just buried alive. He was trapped with something. His hand brushed that same fabric again, and when he pulled it closer, he realized it wasn't fabric at all. It was a sleeve wrapped around an arm, cold, stiff, and unmistakably human. He froze. The arm belonged to a corpse lying beside him. The face was inches away, decayed beyond recognition, its mouth open in a frozen scream. Ethan gagged, turning away, but there was nowhere to go. The coffin was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Every breath tasted of soil and death. Then, through the pounding of his own heartbeat, he heard it. A faint tapping sound. Tap. 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 It came from above, rhythmic and slow, as if someone were walking across the ground above his grave. He tried to scream again, but the air was thick, his voice barely escaped his throat. He started pounding the lid, desperate, shouting hoarsely, "Help me! I'm alive! Please!" The tapping paused for a moment. Then came a soft dragging sound, followed by a whisper right above his ear, muffled by the wooden barrier. "You shouldn't have looked for your grave, Ethan." The voice was the same, the man from the cemetery. Ethan's pulse raced faster. "Who are you?" he shouted. "What do you want from me?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, a new sound began, a scraping noise like metal against wood, something sharp cutting into the coffin lid. Dust rained down over his face. He shielded his eyes, coughing violently as the scraping grew louder, closer. And then suddenly, light poured in. A pale hand reached through the hole. Not to grab him, but to offer him a way out. Trembling, Ethan seized it, and the next second he was being pulled upward, his body dragged through mud and roots until his head burst above ground. He gasped for air, clawing at the earth until he was fully out. He collapsed beside the grave, coughing dirt from his lungs. When he looked up, the man in the long coat stood over him, face hidden beneath the brim of a rain-soaked hat. His coat was torn and covered in mud, his boots half sunk into the earth. "You weren't supposed to wake up," the man said softly. Ethan tried to stand, but his legs were weak. "Who are you? What the hell is this place?" The man tilted his head. "You already know. You just don't remember." Ethan stared at him, confused and terrified. "Remember what?" The man didn't reply. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the fog-shrouded mausoleum at the center of the cemetery. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then followed, every instinct in his body screaming that he shouldn't, but his curiosity refusing to let him go. The mausoleum loomed ahead, built of crumbling marble, its iron door chained shut. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone, circles intersecting with lines, forming something that looked halfway between a sigil and a map. The man stopped before it, pressing a hand to the cold surface. "Do you hear them?" he asked. Ethan strained his ears. At first he heard nothing. Then, a faint chorus of voices echoing from inside the tomb. They were whispering, crying, pleading. "Set us free. Set us free." Ethan took a step back, shaking his head. "What is this?" The man turned, his face now partly visible under the flickering light of Ethan's flashlight. His skin was grayish, almost translucent, veins faintly pulsing beneath the surface. His eyes, cloudy white, like those of a corpse. "This ground doesn't keep the dead," he said. "It holds the forgotten." Ethan swallowed hard. "Forgotten?" The man nodded slowly. "Those whose names were erased, whose deaths were denied. This place remembers them all, and now it remembers you." A chill ran through Ethan's spine. "Why me?" The man gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his dead eyes. "Because you opened the gate." The air around them shifted. The fog seemed to thicken, and a low rumble echoed beneath their feet. The ground trembled, and several tombstones cracked down the middle. Ethan stumbled, gripping a nearby headstone for balance. The man didn't move. He simply whispered something, words Ethan couldn't understand. The chain on the mausoleum door rattled violently, then snapped. The door creaked open. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of decay and something older, fouler, something ancient. Ethan aimed his flashlight inside. Rows of stone coffins lined the walls, each carved with symbols. But at the far end of the chamber stood something different, a mirror, a full-length, ornate mirror, with a black frame shaped like twisted roots. The man stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said. "Look." Ethan hesitated. Every nerve in his body told him not to move closer, but he did. He wiped the dust from the mirror's surface, expecting to see his reflection. But there was nothing. No image at all. Just blackness, as if the mirror refused to acknowledge him. Then slowly something appeared. A figure standing behind him. He spun around. No one was there. When he turned back to the mirror, the figure was still visible, standing over his shoulder, its face obscured by darkness. Ethan stepped back, heart hammering in his chest. "What is that?" The man in the coat didn't answer. He only whispered, "That's you, Ethan. That's what's left." The reflection raised its head, and Ethan saw its face. His face, but pale, hollow and grinning with rotted teeth. The mirror began to crack. A thin line split it down the middle, spreading like lightning. From the crack, a sound emerged, soft at first, then growing louder. It was laughter. Ethan stumbled backward as the reflection reached toward the glass. The surface rippled like water. And then, a voice whispered from behind him again. "You're not the first to come back. You just might be the last." The laughter turned into screams. The mirror shattered. Shards flew outward, slicing through the air like glass rain. Ethan shielded his face and fell to the ground, his flashlight rolling away. When he looked up again, the mirror was gone, and so was the man. Only the mausoleum remained, silent and empty. But from somewhere deep below, he could still hear the whispers. This time, they were calling his name again. Ethan, Ethan, we remember you. His breath trembled as he backed out of the tomb, tripping over a root and crashing to the ground outside. The fog swirled around him, thicker than before, almost liquid. The sky above the cemetery was changing, dark clouds spiraling unnaturally, a storm gathering without wind. And in the distance he saw something moving between the headstones. Dozens of shadowy figures, rising from the ground, slowly, silently, crawling toward him. Ethan stumbled backward as the figures emerged through the mist, pale silhouettes dragging themselves from the wet ground, their movements slow and deliberate, as though fighting against invisible chains. The fog made it difficult to tell how many there were, 10, 20, maybe more, but their shapes were unmistakable. Human, dead, but moving with eerie purpose. Their faces were hidden, yet Ethan could feel their gaze pressing against him, hollow and hungry. He turned and ran. His boots sank into the mud as he sprinted down the narrow gravel path, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. Every few steps he looked over his shoulder, expecting to see the things chasing him. But they didn't run. They just kept walking, closing in, their silent persistence more terrifying than any scream. The cemetery stretched endlessly now. The path that had once been short seemed to twist and wind through endless rows of gravestones. The gate he'd entered from was nowhere in sight. He passed mausoleums, statues, and crosses, each more weathered and ancient than the last, yet somehow none of them looked familiar anymore. It was as if the whole graveyard had shifted around him, like a maze that refused to let him leave. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands shook violently as he tried to reload his flashlight's batteries. It flickered, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed him whole. For a few moments he could see nothing at all. Only the soft glow of the moon struggled through the fog. Then he heard it again. Whispers, hundreds of them. They came from everywhere, the trees, the graves, the very soil beneath his feet. Some were crying, some praying, others murmuring his name over and over again. He clutched his ears, shouting, "Stop, stop it." But the voices only grew louder, overlapping, turning into a rising tide of madness. Suddenly a sharp voice cut through the rest, a woman's voice, clear and trembling. "Ethan, help me." He froze. That voice. It sounded familiar. He turned slowly, scanning the fog. "Who's there?" he called. "Who said that?" A faint shape emerged near an old willow tree, a woman in a long white dress, her hair tangled and soaked from the mist. Her face was pale but unmistakable. Ethan's chest tightened. Sarah? Sarah Winters, his ex-girlfriend, the one who had gone missing 3 years ago while covering a similar story in a nearby town. They'd found her car by the woods, but never her body. He had blamed himself for convincing her to take the job. He took a cautious step toward her. "Sarah, how are you here?" Her eyes glistened, reflecting faint moonlight. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan," she whispered. Her voice was shaky, like a recording warped by static. "They'll take you too." Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. "Sarah, I thought you were dead." She shook her head slowly. "We all are." He stopped breathing for a moment. The words hung in the air like frost. Then she lifted her hand and pointed toward the center of the cemetery. "The Hollow wants you. Don't let it take your name." "The Hollow," he repeated, confused. But before he could move closer, Sarah began to fade. Her skin grew translucent, her features dissolving into mist. Ethan reached for her, shouting her name, but his fingers passed through cold air. And as she vanished, a shadow rose from where she had stood, a darker shape, crawling upward from the ground like smoke. It had no face, no eyes, just a black outline of a man, its surface shifting like water. The temperature around Ethan plummeted. His breath turned to vapor. The shadow moved toward him, each step silent, each movement unnervingly human. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over a broken gravestone. His flashlight flickered back to life, briefly illuminating the shadow, and for a split second, he saw his own reflection within it. Himself, but twisted, eyes sunken, lips sewn shut. He screamed and threw the flashlight at the figure, but it passed through harmlessly. Then the ground beneath him cracked. The earth split open in a jagged line stretching across the cemetery, releasing a foul stench of rot. From the fissure, countless hands reached out, skeletal, muddy, writhing like worms. Ethan scrambled away on all fours as the hands grasped at his legs, clawing, pulling him toward the gap. He kicked wildly, feeling fingers scrape against his boots. He managed to grab a nearby headstone and pull himself free, but the voices grew louder, overlapping in painful, inhuman tones. They weren't calling his name anymore. They were chanting something else. A single phrase repeated again and again. "Return what was taken." Ethan staggered to his feet. "What do you want from me?" he shouted into the darkness. "What did I take?" The chanting stopped all at once. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then a single voice, calm, deep and cold, answered from behind him. "Your place." Ethan turned slowly. Standing only a few feet away was the man in the long coat. His face was clearer now, skin gray and cracked like stone, lips dry and colorless, eyes black pits. He was holding something in his hand, an old photograph. He handed it to Ethan. "You don't remember this, do you?" Ethan hesitated before taking it. The photo was old, creased, and water-stained, showing a group of men in front of the same cemetery gate. All of them looked like miners or workers from the early 1900s, except for one. The man standing in the center looked exactly like Ethan. Same eyes, same face, same faint scar above the left eyebrow. His stomach turned. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "That's not me." The man's expression didn't change. "You think time forgets? You think the ground forgets?" "I don't understand." Ethan began, but the man stepped closer, cutting him off. "You died here once, Ethan. You came back when you weren't supposed to. You took a name that wasn't yours." Ethan felt dizzy. The photo trembled in his hands. "No. I was born in 1988, not what?" The man smiled faintly. "Not 1898. Ethan's mouth went dry. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as some insane trick, but the man's tone, the fog, the graves, everything around him felt too real to dismiss. The man turned away. "Follow the whispers," he said. "They'll show you the truth. But hurry, before they decide to keep you." And with that, he walked into the fog and vanished once again. Ethan stood there, shaking, the photograph still in his hands. The whispers had returned, softer now, guiding him deeper into the cemetery. Against every instinct, he followed them, one hesitant step at a time. As he walked, he passed a row of new graves, graves that hadn't been there before. Each had fresh dirt, each bore a single unmarked headstone. But when he brushed the dirt away from one of them, his heart stopped. The name carved into the stone read, Sarah Winters, born 1993, died 2022. He took a step back, trembling. Then he realized something else. There was another grave right beside hers. The name on it made his blood run cold. Ethan Cole, born 1898, died 1925. His flashlight flickered, then went out completely. And from somewhere deep beneath his feet, a heartbeat began to echo, slow, heavy, and getting closer. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the pair of graves before him. His name carved twice into the cold stone, one from a life he remembered, and another from a time he never lived. The fog seemed to tighten around him like a living thing, pressing against his lungs, whispering through his hair. The air was charged with a strange static hum that made the tiny hairs on his arms rise. He stepped closer to the older gravestone, the one that said 1898 to 1925, and brushed his fingers across the carved letters. The surface pulsed faintly beneath his skin, warm like flesh. He yanked his hand back, heart hammering. The stone. It had moved. Then came the sound again. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, steady, rhythmic, like a buried heart beating from within the soil. It was coming from beneath the old grave, growing louder, more desperate. Ethan dropped the photograph and stumbled backward, eyes wide. No, he whispered to himself. No, this can't be happening. But it was. The ground beneath the stone began to crack. A jagged line split through the earth, and dark soil poured outward like blood. The air grew cold, breath visible in the fog. A faint voice rose up from beneath, weak at first, then stronger. So familiar it made Ethan's blood run cold. Ethan, let me out. It was his voice. He shook his head violently, backing away. No, that's not possible. But the voice came again, pleading, broken. Please, it's so dark down here, help me. The earth trembled, the grave shifting as if something beneath was pushing against it. Ethan's flashlight flickered and flared, illuminating a pair of pale hands clawing through the dirt. He stumbled, nearly tripping over a broken cross. The hands reached higher, trembling and desperate. Then the face appeared, covered in mud, half decayed, yet unmistakably his own. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same scar above the eyebrow. It gasped for air like a drowning man breaching the surface. Its gaze locked with Ethan's, and for a moment, time froze. Who are you? Ethan whispered. The figure coughed, its voice rasping. You know who I am. You took everything from me. Ethan shook his head, terrified. No, I didn't take anything. The corpse gave a wet laugh. Then why does the ground know your name? The thing climbed higher out of the grave, its fingers clawing into the soil. Its body was dressed in torn 1920s clothing, suspenders, a dirt-streaked white shirt, and boots rotted through. As it stood, it towered over Ethan, swaying like a puppet held up by unseen strings. Its eyes were full of rot and pain. I remember when they buried me, it said slowly. The cold, the worms, the silence. But then you came. You opened the gate. You woke us. Ethan's hands trembled violently. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't wake anyone. The corpse tilted its head. Every story you've written, every name you've spoken into ink, you gave us voice again. You brought us back. He didn't understand. His mind was spinning, memories colliding in his skull, his journalism, the articles he wrote about forgotten towns, abandoned cemeteries, vanished people. Was this what the message had meant? Find the headstone with your name. His pulse roared in his ears. He turned the page. The next was filled with notes. His notes. He recognized his own handwriting, describing Hollow Creek Cemetery, the local legends, the date and time he had arrived. But there was more. Entire paragraphs he had never written. Descriptions of his death, of his body being buried, of the man in the long coat watching over his grave. No, he whispered. This isn't mine. But when he turned to the last page, the words there chilled him to the core. The writer always becomes the written. Suddenly a noise echoed from the back of the chapel, a door creaking open. Ethan turned sharply, holding the journal like a weapon. A shadow slipped through the doorway and stepped into the candlelight. It was the man in the long coat again. His face was darker now, more decayed. His voice was quieter, almost sorrowful. You weren't supposed to read that, he said. Ethan gritted his teeth. Tell me what's happening. Who are you? The man stepped closer. You called me here, Ethan. I am the keeper of this ground. Every name written here belongs to me. You should have stayed forgotten. I didn't write any of this, Ethan shouted, waving the journal. Someone is doing this to me. The man's eyes gleamed faintly. No, Ethan, you did this to yourself. Every time you wrote about the dead, you bound yourself closer to them. The cemetery doesn't just hold bodies, it holds stories, and now it's writing yours." Ethan looked down at the journal again and watched in horror as fresh words appeared on the page before his eyes. He looks down at the book, realizing he can never leave. His breath caught. The pen wasn't moving, but the ink was still spreading, forming letters, describing his every thought, every movement. He dropped the journal and ran for the door, slamming into it with all his strength, but it wouldn't open. The candle flames flickered violently, and the whispers began again, echoing off the chapel walls. "You wrote us. Now we'll write you." The candles went out all at once, plunging him into total darkness. And in that silence, something began writing again. Slowly, rhythmically, like a quill dragging across parchment. Ethan turned toward the sound, trembling. In the pitch black, the man's voice whispered one last time, "Welcome to your own story." The night had grown colder, the mist thicker, wrapping the cemetery in a ghostly shroud that seemed almost alive. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his hand as he moved deeper into the graveyard, each breath a small cloud of white in the chill. Somewhere behind him he could still hear Mia's distant sobs fading into the night, her figure swallowed by the fog. He wanted to go back for her, but something in the air, something unseen, pulled him forward. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was compulsion. Something deep beneath the earth was calling him. He stopped near an ancient oak tree whose gnarled roots burst through the cracked soil like the fingers of something buried too long. The air here was heavy with decay, the stench of rot almost unbearable. His flashlight beam danced across the gravestones until it landed on one he hadn't seen before, its inscription half erased by time. The letters were faint, but he could make out enough to read. Eleanor Graves, beloved daughter, 1849, 1864. 14 years old, dead for over a century and a half. The earth beneath her stone was uneven, as if it had been disturbed. Ethan crouched, brushing away leaves and bits of old dirt. He froze, fresh soil, recently turned. His pulse quickened. Someone had dug here, or something had tried to get out. Suddenly the ground beneath his hand felt wrong, soft, as if breathing. He pressed again. The soil moved like something beneath it had shifted. Ethan stumbled backward, his heart hammering. Then came the whisper. It wasn't from around him. It was below him. Ethan. His name, spoken softly, stretched out like the sigh of the dead. He fell backward, scrambling away, his flashlight flickering. The whisper came again, clearer now, an echo rising from the earth. "Help. Me." He stared at the grave, frozen in disbelief. The soil was moving, slowly sinking in the center, as though something was pushing from beneath. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't obey. The sound grew louder, scratching, faint but deliberate, fingernails against wood. He wanted to shout, to call for Mia, but his throat was dry. Then, as if some invisible force urged him forward, he found himself on his knees again, his trembling hands brushing away dirt. He dug, shallow at first, then deeper, until his fingers hit something solid. Wood. The coffin. Ethan gasped, pulling his hands away. The scratching had stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a soft thud from inside the coffin, followed by another. He staggered backward, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. A voice whispered again, softer now, almost pleading. "Don't leave me. Please." And then came the smell, sweet and foul at once, the unmistakable stench of death and something far older. He dropped the flashlight, its beam rolling across the ground until it landed on something that made his stomach twist. A hand, pale and bloated, poking through the soil near the coffin's edge. It twitched. Ethan screamed and stumbled back, his legs tangling in roots. The flashlight went out, plunging him into total darkness. The only thing he could hear now was the faint creak of wood, and then the sound of something rising. The earth shuddered as if rejecting what was beneath it. He ran. Branches clawed at him as he tore through the mist, the distant sound of movement following him. Slow, dragging steps. His chest burned as he sprinted toward the gate, but the fog was disorienting. He could barely see 5 feet ahead. Every direction looked the same. "Ethan!" The voice, Mia's, cut through the fog. Relief surged through him. He turned toward the sound and saw her silhouette emerging from the mist. He rushed forward, grabbing her arms. "Mia, we need to go. There's someone, down there." Her face was pale, eyes wide. I heard it too. A voice. It said my name. Before Ethan could reply, a sound rose behind them. A low moan like wind through a hollow throat. They turned, their flashlights flickering back to life for a moment. And there, at the edge of the fog, they saw her. A girl in a dirt-stained white dress, her long hair hanging wet and tangled over her face. Her bare feet left muddy prints as she took slow, uneven steps toward them. Her hands were covered in soil. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, until her head tilted sharply, and her eyes locked onto Ethan. "You dug me up," she whispered. Ethan froze. The voice, it was the same whisper from the grave. Her expression twisted in sorrow and fury as she took another step forward. The fog around her seemed to pulse with each breath she took, and the ground beneath her feet shimmered like water. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers blackened as if burned. "You shouldn't have come here," Mia screamed, grabbing Ethan's hand and yanking him backward. They ran, tripping over gravestones and tree roots, the sound of the girl's sobs echoing behind them, soft, broken, and impossibly close. Then the ground gave way. Ethan fell hard, tumbling into what felt like an open pit. He hit the bottom with a thud, the air knocked from his lungs. Dirt fell around him. He looked up. Mia's terrified face above him, her flashlight trembling. "Ethan, I can't—" The soil around the pit began to shift again, sliding inward as if the earth itself were closing its mouth. Ethan clawed at the sides, but the walls were too soft. He looked up one last time before everything went dark, and saw a pale hand reach for Mia from behind. She turned. Her scream echoed through the night as the light from her flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The whisper returned. But this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many. "Stay with us." And then, something cold brushed Ethan's ankle. He screamed. The sound of Ethan's own heartbeat thundered in his ears as the soil caved around him. Every gasp filled his lungs with dust and decay. He could no longer see the stars, no longer hear Mia's voice, only the low groan of shifting earth and that chorus of whispers, rising like the rustle of 1,000 unseen mouths beneath the ground. He tried to move, clawing upward through the collapsing dirt, but his hands met only soft mud and something worse, something textured, cold and almost fleshy. It pulsed faintly under his fingertips as if alive. He yanked his hand back in terror, heart slamming in his chest. Then, just when the weight of the soil threatened to crush him, his body slipped through something, an empty pocket in the ground. He fell again, hard, landing on stone instead of earth. The air was thick with the smell of mold and old rot. Ethan coughed violently, fumbling for his flashlight, praying the batteries hadn't died. When he finally switched it on, the beam pierced through the darkness, and what it revealed made his blood run cold. He was in a tunnel, a vast one, hollowed out beneath the cemetery. The walls were lined with bones, human bones, fitted together like bricks, skulls embedded between them like silent sentinels. Old, rotting wood planks stretched overhead, barely holding up the weight of the world above. And across the stone floor, carved into the ground with something sharp, were strange circular markings that pulsed faintly, almost like veins. Ethan's mind screamed to find a way out, but his curiosity, his fatal flaw, pulled him deeper. He followed the tunnel, his footsteps echoing softly. The air grew colder with every step. Water dripped from somewhere above, hitting the stone in rhythmic beats, like the ticking of an unseen clock. After what felt like several minutes, he saw a dim light flickering up ahead, a dull yellow glow like candlelight. He moved toward it cautiously, pressing his back to the wall as he neared the corner. He peered around it and froze. A small chamber opened before him, lit by half-burnt candles placed in a circle. In the center of that circle lay something wrapped in old, tattered sheets. A body, maybe, or something shaped like one. The candles cast long, trembling shadows across the room, and the air vibrated faintly with an unholy hum, so low it made Ethan's stomach twist. He took a hesitant step forward. The sound grew louder. He leaned closer to the wrapped figure, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The fabric was damp, darkened with stains that looked too much like dried blood. And then, as if reacting to his presence, the figure moved. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over a bone. The shape inside the sheet twitched again, and a faint gasp, like someone taking their first breath in centuries, escaped from within. The candles flickered wildly. One by one, they went out. "Ethan." The voice came from behind him this time, low, soft, female. He turned sharply, raising his flashlight, and saw Mia. She stood in the doorway of the chamber, her clothes torn, her hair matted with dirt. Her eyes were wide and distant, her lips trembling. Ethan rushed toward her in relief. "Mia! Thank God, are you okay? I thought—" But as he got closer, something in her expression stopped him cold. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they weren't the same. The irises were dull, cloudy, like something that hadn't seen light in a very long time. She tilted her head slightly. "You shouldn't be down here, Ethan." His flashlight flickered, and for a split second, her reflection appeared wrong. The light passed through her as though she wasn't completely solid. "Mia?" His voice broke. "What happened to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her hand and pointed to the figure on the floor. "She's waiting." Before Ethan could respond, the sheet began to shift again. The fabric peeled back just enough for him to glimpse what was inside. His mind recoiled instantly. The skin was gray, mottled, stretched thin over bone. But what froze him completely was the face. It looked almost human, almost alive. He took a step backward. The face twitched. The lips cracked open. "Let me out." Ethan's body locked in terror. The voice came not from the lips, but from inside his head. He felt it echo through his skull, twisting his thoughts. He turned to Mia, but she was gone. The doorway was empty. The tunnel behind him was swallowed in pitch black. Panic surged through him. He spun around again, only to find the sheet now completely pulled aside. The body was gone. Then came the sound, a dragging noise, like something wet sliding across the stone floor. He shined his light toward it, but the beam barely reached. The sound grew louder, closer, and then just at the edge of the light, he saw a figure crawling toward him. It was the girl from the grave, Eleanor. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, her neck bent at a grotesque angle. Dirt fell from her dress as she dragged herself forward, her nails scraping against the stone. Her mouth hung open, whispering words too soft to understand. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his flashlight like a weapon, but the moment he turned to run, another figure emerged from the wall, literally through it. The skeletal remains that lined the tunnel were no longer still. Skulls turned, eye sockets hollow but aware. Bones shifted, cracking and sliding against one another. The walls were moving. The entire tunnel seemed to come alive, pulsating like some massive organism. The whispers filled every inch of the space, hundreds of voices murmuring in unison. Ethan ran blindly, the light bouncing wildly, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The tunnel twisted and turned, deeper and deeper, until suddenly the floor vanished beneath him. He fell again, this time landing in shallow, ice-cold water. The flashlight slipped from his grasp, floating a few feet away. He grabbed it, flipping it up just in time to see what surrounded him. Dozens of wooden coffins, half submerged, all open. And every single one was empty. Ethan's stomach twisted as he turned in a slow circle. The water rippled faintly, disturbed by something unseen. Then, from the darkness ahead, a low, guttural voice whispered, closer than before. "You woke them, Ethan." The water behind him stirred violently. He spun around and froze as pale hands burst from the surface, clawing at his legs, his clothes, pulling him downward. Faces began to rise from the black water, eyes blank, mouths gasping silently. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but there were too many. Cold fingers dragged him under, choking out the last of his breath. The light dimmed above him, fading slowly as the whispers grew louder, surrounding him entirely. And then, just as the world began to fade, a voice, soft and familiar, cut through the noise. "Ethan, it's me. Wake up." Mia's voice. His eyes flew open. He was lying on the ground again, back in the cemetery. Morning light was breaking through the fog. Birds were singing. Everything was calm. He sat up, gasping, his body shaking. The graves looked normal. The oak tree stood silent and still. The pit where he'd fallen was gone, filled completely, as if it had never existed. "Mia?" he called weakly. No answer. Only one thing had changed. The gravestone before him no longer read Eleanor Graves. It read, Ethan Cole, 1997-2023. His blood ran cold. Miles's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the glowing screen. His laptop camera light blinked faintly, even though he had disabled it years ago. On the live feed, he saw himself standing perfectly still in the center of the room. But something was wrong. His reflection wasn't mirroring him anymore. While Miles remained frozen, the figure in the feed tilted its head slowly to the side, its mouth twitching into a half-smile that wasn't his. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened around him. The soft hum he'd heard before was now pulsing through the apartment's walls, almost like a heartbeat. He took a slow, trembling step backward, and the figure on the screen took one forward, then another, until it was right up against the edge of the camera's frame, staring directly at him, eyes black as the fog over Hollow Creek. "Enough," Miles whispered, more to himself than to it. He lunged forward and slammed the laptop shut. The light snapped off. Silence returned, save for his pounding heartbeat. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. He grabbed the hard drive, stuffed it into a desk drawer, and began pacing. "It's just a recording," he muttered. "An elaborate hoax, some kind of augmented reality thing." Yet deep down he knew better. There had been no trick. He'd seen something that didn't belong in this world, and worse, it had seen him back. Trying to calm his shaking hands, Miles unplugged every device in the apartment, the laptop, the router, even his phone charger. Then, as a final measure, he yanked the blinds shut and turned off the lights. For the first time since retiring, he felt like a rookie again, terrified, cornered by something invisible. He poured another drink, his mind racing. The Hollow remembers, Lena had said, a sentient place feeding on memory. If that was true, then maybe, just maybe, it had reached through the footage to mark him as its next witness. The more he thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. The cemetery, Ethan Cole, Lena, now him. Each one drawn in by curiosity, each one trying to uncover the truth, and each one ending up part of the Hollow's story. The apartment lights flickered. Miles froze mid-step. He looked toward the kitchen where the bulb over the sink was pulsing. Dim, bright, dim again, like it was trying to signal something. Then he heard the faint scratching. It came from the drawer that held the hard drive. Miles's throat went dry. He approached it slowly, every sound in the apartment amplified. The creak of the floor, the ticking of the wall clock, the rush of his own blood in his ears. The scratching grew louder, sharper, like nails scraping against metal. Then from inside the drawer, a muffled voice whispered, "Miles." Watch it again. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. No, he hissed. No, I won't. But even as he said it, the urge crept in, an overwhelming compulsion to open the drawer to see. It was as if something deep inside his brain had been rewired, whispering that one more look wouldn't hurt. Just one more glimpse. His hand moved on its own, trembling as he reached for the handle. The moment he pulled it open, the scratching stopped. The hard drive sat still and silent. Then the laptop behind him clicked open by itself. The screen glowed blood red. He turned slowly, every muscle in his body screaming not to. On the screen, the feed had returned, but this time it wasn't live. It showed footage of his own apartment from minutes earlier. He watched in horror as he opened the drawer, turned toward the laptop and froze, exactly as he was doing now. Then, in the video, something crawled out of the darkness behind his mirrored self. It was long-limbed, pale, and wrong, its movements jerky, as if time didn't flow the same way for it. It placed one skeletal hand on his shoulder and the real Miles felt it. Cold, wet, and impossibly heavy. He spun around, but there was nothing there. When he turned back to the screen, the figure was now closer, its face pressed against the camera lens. A distorted voice seeped through the speakers, layered and ancient. You looked. Now we remember you. The apartment went pitch black. Miles dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the hum became deafening, vibrating through his bones. The walls seemed to breathe, flexing in and out like the chest of a sleeping giant. The smell of damp earth filled the air. He could feel the hollow now, stretching out beneath him, reaching upward through concrete and steel. And then it stopped. When Miles opened his eyes, the lights had returned. The laptop was gone. So was the drawer, the hard drive, and even his notes. The entire apartment looked untouched, as if the last hour had never happened. He stood shakily trying to make sense of it, when his doorbell rang. For a moment he hesitated. Then cautiously, he opened the door. No one stood there. Only a small unmarked cardboard box sat on the doormat. Inside it was a single object. A camera. Old, dusty, with a cracked lens. He turned it over in his hands and felt a chill run down his spine. Carved into the bottom in uneven letters were 3 words. Until the next one. He backed away, his breath trembling. The camera slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, spilling open. A film roll unspooled across the tiles, hundreds of tiny photographs, each one showing the same thing. The cemetery gate, the fog, and a faint silhouette standing behind it. But in the final frame, the figure's face was clear. It was Miles. His phone buzzed suddenly. A notification appeared from an unknown number. Backup uploaded. Hollow Creek investigation, Miles Donovan. The file size read 6.66 GB. No, he whispered. No, that's not possible. He turned his phone off, then yanked out the battery just to be sure. But as he glanced at the dark screen, his reflection smiled back at him. Slowly, deliberately. He ran for the door, throwing it open. But instead of the apartment hallway, thick fog spilled in. A graveyard stretched out before him under a colorless sky. He could hear whispers drifting between the tombstones, faint and endless. His eyes darted downward to the nearest grave, and his heart stopped. The inscription read, Miles Donovan, Keeper of the Hollow, resting at last. His body went cold. The whispering grew louder until it formed words. You told the story. Now the story tells you. The fog consumed him, and the apartment was empty once more. The next morning, a maintenance worker found the door locked from the inside. Miles was never seen again. But a week later, an email began circulating among paranormal forums. No one knew who sent it. Attached was a video file labeled simply, Hollow Creek, Final Cut. And when people pressed play, they swore they saw the same thing. Miles standing in the cemetery, staring at Ethan Cole's grave, whispering, almost pleading, "Don't remember me." The story of Hollow Creek did not end with Miles Donovan's disappearance. It only began to unravel further. The world moved on, as it always does. But beneath the surface of quiet towns and forgotten cemeteries, something ancient stirred again. The fog that had long haunted the hollow began to spread, creeping through nearby woods and villages. Animals fled without reason, electronic devices malfunctioned, and people spoke in hushed voices about hearing whispers at night. No one understood that the story was feeding, growing stronger through each person who dared to speak its name. Months after Miles vanished, a young researcher named Nora Keller arrived in town. She wasn't there for ghost stories. She was a historian, digging into old municipal records for a book about unmarked graves across forgotten settlements. When she stumbled across Hollow Creek Cemetery, in an 1823 ledger, something caught her eye. The entry was scratched out, then written over again, as if someone had tried to erase it, then decided to let it remain. Next to it were the chilling words, "First burial, unknown child, unrecorded, witnesses forbidden." Intrigued, Nora traced the handwriting to an old parish scribe named Elias Rowan, a man who, according to town archives, went mad shortly after the burial and was committed to a sanitarium, where he carved symbols into his walls until his death. Nora thought it was a legend, until she found one of his journals locked inside a wooden chest in the town library basement. The pages were brittle, stained with something dark, but the ink still whispered its story. The child was not born, Elias had written in shaking lines, but found. Found at the edge of the hollow after the storm. She did not cry. She did not breathe. Yet the ground bent beneath her. Nora read on, each entry worse than the last. He described the child growing cold but never decaying, her eyes open for weeks, unblinking. Villagers feared her, calling her the Hollow's daughter. When they finally buried her, the fog came for the first time, rolling down the valley and swallowing half the town. Elias's final entry was a plea. The Hollow remembers the first grave. She was not meant to rest. Nora sat back, her heart hammering. Every rational part of her mind screamed to stop, but the pull was irresistible. She booked a small cabin on the outskirts of the old cemetery, now abandoned and reclaimed by forest. Locals warned her away, muttering about the mist that hums and the watchers that walk without sound. But Nora was a skeptic. She brought her camera, drone, and research equipment, determined to document everything. On her first night there, the woods were silent. Too silent. Even the insects refused to sing. Nora recorded herself walking through the thick brush until she found the remnants of an iron gate half buried in vines. The rusted letters spelled Hollow Creek. Beyond it lay rows of tilted gravestones, their markings eroded by time. She moved deeper in, flashlight cutting through the darkness, until she reached a clearing. There, the fog swirled unnaturally, coiling around a single stone that was different from the others. It was larger, older, carved from black granite. And unlike the others, it bore no name. Only one sentence. Here lies the first to be remembered. Nora crouched down, brushing away the moss. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cold surface. The hum began. Faint at first, then rising, vibrating the air. Her flashlight flickered, and the fog thickened until she could barely see her own hands. She tried to stand but felt her legs rooted to the ground. From within the mist came a faint sound, the laughter of a child. Her camera began recording on its own. On the tiny screen she saw movement, small footprints forming in the damp soil circling her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Then, the voice came, a whisper so soft it seemed to crawl directly into her mind. "He remembered me. Now you must too." The fog burst open, and for an instant Nora saw her. The girl was impossibly pale, her eyes two dark voids, her mouth stitched with shadows. Her dress looked like it was made of ash, and her hands, long and skeletal, reached out with slow, trembling curiosity. Nora screamed and ran. Branches tore at her clothes. Roots clawed at her ankles. But the fog chased her, alive and sentient. She reached the cabin, slammed the door shut, and collapsed against it. For several minutes, all she could hear was her heartbeat. Then came the soft knock. 3 times. Gentle. Rhythmic. She didn't answer. She didn't breathe. The knock came again, followed by the same whisper from the woods. Remember the first. The lights went out. The camera on her table blinked to life by itself. The lens turned toward her, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw not her own face, but the girl's, smiling, waiting. When dawn came, the cabin was empty. Only the camera remained, still recording. Local authorities found the footage days later, but by then, Nora's name had already begun appearing in the same online forums that once spoke of Miles Donovan. Users who downloaded the video reported strange side effects, whispering in their homes, mirrors fogging up without reason, and fleeting glimpses of a child standing in corners of their rooms. Experts tried to remove the file from the internet, but every deletion only seemed to spawn more copies. The metadata always contained the same line of code, looping endlessly. First remembered, never forgotten. And so, the hollow endures, not buried beneath earth or stone, but within memory itself. Each retelling, each curious listener, each replay of that cursed footage feeds it. For the hollow was never about death. It was about remembrance, the kind that doesn't let go. And somewhere, deep in the fog that never lifts, the little girl waits by the first grave, whispering to every lost soul who dares to enter, "Tell my story, so I can find you too." The fog had grown thicker than it ever had before. It no longer stayed confined to the old cemetery. It moved through towns, down streets, slipping beneath doorways and into the glow of computer screens. People who had never heard of Hollow Creek suddenly began dreaming of it, seeing it in flashes between their phone notifications, in the reflection of their dark TVs, in the shimmer of static between channels. The story had become a virus. Every telling, every upload, every whispered retelling was a doorway, and the Hollow had learned how to step through them all. The video Nora Keller recorded was now everywhere. No matter how many servers were shut down, or how many networks were scrubbed clean, it kept coming back. Some swore it uploaded itself from corrupted drives. Others said it appeared as an ad, a random autoplay, or even a suggested video late at night. The footage began the same way each time. Nora standing before the nameless grave, whispering, "Here lies the first to be remembered." But at the end, just before the static, something new began appearing. A flicker. A shadow. The faint outline of the child's face, now smiling directly into the camera, as if recognizing whoever was watching. And then came the whisper, not from the video speakers, from the room itself. "You remember me now." Across the country, reports began flooding in of people vanishing without explanation. Entire families found their screens glowing red in the middle of the night. Police dispatchers heard faint humming on the lines before calls were cut off. In one town, a whole neighborhood disappeared overnight, leaving only the thick silver fog behind. The government called it a mass delusion. Scientists said it was a visual hallucination phenomenon triggered by viral content. But the truth was simpler, older, and far more terrifying. The Hollow had found a new home. It no longer needed the cemetery. It lived in the story itself. Miles Donovan's apartment was discovered months later. His laptop was still on, though long drained of power. Written on the wall in his own handwriting was a single line over and over again. "The Hollow remembers what we forget." Investigators who entered the apartment later reported hearing faint knocking sounds through the walls. 3 slow taps, rhythmic and deliberate. And then, one of them found the parchment, the same that once came in the package Miles received. It was blank now, but when they held it to the light, faint words appeared, glowing blood red. "The last grave is dug." That night, the fog returned to Hollow Creek one final time. The ground trembled as the nameless headstone cracked open. Beneath it, where a coffin should have been, there was only darkness, vast, endless, breathing darkness. From that pit came a low, mournful sound like wind through dead trees, followed by the soft echo of a child's laughter. Then silence. When morning came, the cemetery was gone. The trees, the graves, even the soil. Nothing remained but a flat expanse of blackened earth. A single object rested in the center. Nora's camera, still recording, the lens fixed on the emptiness. The timer read 0000, looping infinitely. No one knows who uploaded the last version of the footage, but within hours it spread worldwide. People everywhere saw it. The empty field, the low hum, the faint outline of a girl walking toward the camera. She got closer with every replay. Closer each time someone clicked, "Watch again." And when she finally reached the screen, her whisper was the same one heard by every single viewer, no matter where they lived. "You've told my story. Now I will tell yours." Then the feed went black. But even in that blackness, if you listen long enough, if you truly listen, you'll hear it. A faint hum, a single knock, and a child's voice, soft and endless, echoing through your room. "Remember me."